Chapter 25. Wednesday, April 8, 7:20 p.m. Jesus, Ally, are you all right? He leaned over and shook her. Fine. She jumped, and then her eyelids fluttered open. Where? She looked around. The sign says this is it. The Institute. Oh shit, Stone, I'm feeling really strange, she said after a moment of getting her bearings. Everything around me. He seems like it's moving. It's as though the space I'm in has an extra dimension. I don't know. Maybe it was totally stupid to come back out here. Maybe I should have just gone to my doctor in the city. Hey, you've got a seriously efficient sense of timing. We're here now. I've been breaking the speed limit for the last half hour. I know, shit. I really don't know what to do. I don't trust anybody. Well, you could start by trusting me. I'm along to try to make sure. Nothing bad happens. He paused. So what do we do? A brass plaque on a red brick pillar beside the gate bore a 2-inch-high inscription, the Dorian Institute, and just below it was an intercom. She stared at it for a moment, then it there, give it a buzz. I think there's a video camera around here somewhere. Last time I was here, they knew I'd arrived. He reached out and touched a black button. Yes, came back a quick voice. She recognized it as belonging to the woman he'd spoken to on the phone. It's Alexa Hampton. She leaned over. We talked, yes, I know, Miss Hampton. He's been waiting for you. A buzzer sounded and the 2 wrought iron gates slid back, welcoming them. As they drove down the tree-lined road, an elegant 3-story red brick structure with white Doric columns across the front slowly came into view. From here, it's pretty classy looking, Stone declared, sizing it up. I know his big manufacturing and research campus is right down the road. But still, it sure feels God-forsaken and lost out here in the middle of these pines. It's like the place is hiding from the world. Where better to do secret medical research, she said. If you want to keep everything proprietary, then the isolation gives you a big jump on security. She directed him to the side parking lot, where she'd left her car that morning. Stone, here's what we'll tell them. Your next of kin, a cousin on my mother's side. Works for me, he declared. I'm beginning to feel part of the family anyway. He pocketed the car keys and helped her out of the Toyota. As they headed up the wide steps past the white columns, Ally felt a wave of nausea sweep through her. She reached out and took Stone's arm and sank against him. I'm not feeling at all well. Please let me hold. No sooner had she said it than the front door opened and 2 nurses appeared, their hair backlit from the glow of the reception area. She recognized one as Ellen O'Hara. Here, dear, let us help you, she said as she strode toward them. She was dressed in white, and her eyes were flooded with concern. Ally looked through the doorway to see a waiting wheelchair. That's fast, Stone said. Looks like they were ready for you. My God, she thought, did they already know what kind of shape I'd be in? What else do they know? Surely Van de Villiet has heard by now that I'm aware of Kristen. Then she saw him standing behind the nurses. Alexa, we need to get you downstairs as soon as possible. He was coming forward to help her settle into the wheelchair. He appeared to take no notice of Stone Ames. I'm just feeling a little dizzy. He smiled reassuringly. There's always a small percentage chance that there may be side effects from the initial inoculation. Huh, what initial inoculation? She bolted upright in the wheelchair. I was just supposed to be giving blood. I thought, Deborah explained, he said, appearing confused. There's always an initial antibiotic dosage just as a prophylactic. He shook his head in self-blame. I should have insisted you stay here, but after that. This morning I was so disoriented I let you talk me out of it. You may be having a reaction to the antibiotic, but it can't be all that serious. I didn't see anything about side effects in your file. We just have to get you horizontal for a while. Everything's going to be all right. In fact, this might be a positive development. With you here now, we can begin fine-tuning your procedure immediately. Dr. Van de Villiet, this is my cousin Stone. He drove me here and I'd really like to stay. Stone said, reaching to shake Van de Villiers' hand. It would mean a lot to both of us, to the whole family. Family, Van de Villiers declared. Ally noticed that he was examining Stone with narrowed eyes and seemed to be debating something with himself. Well, we'll see. Then he turned back to her. The first thing is to make sure your situation is stabilized. I actually think a good night's rest might do the trick. But I need to run a quick blood test downstairs. She felt her dizziness coming and going, but she was determined to stay awake and in control of what was being done to her. By the way, I was wondering how is Catherine Starr doing? His eyes grew somber. She's a very lucky woman, considering we've given her some coagulants and stitched her up. Are you going to press charges? He looked at her strangely. Do you think we should? I guess it's none of my business. Of course you won't, she told herself. The Kristen matter will not stand the ordinary light of day, let alone a police investigation. Maybe it's time to let her daughter come and see her. I looked at that letter, he said with a matter-of-fact tone. I suspect it's a hoax and a very cruel one at that. I don't think so. I talked to her today, the woman formerly known as Kristen, on the phone. She stared at him. I really think it's time I learned more about what happened to her here at the Institute. All I could really find out was that she thinks she's experienced some pretty dramatic memory loss. He looked as though this information was new to him. He also looked startled. You spoke to her? What? She say, is she all right? No, she's not all right. Don't mention the kidnapping, she told herself. Play dumb and see how he behaves. I want to know what happened to her when she was here. He paused, then took a deep breath. I told you everything I know this morning. She was a very troubled young person. Her treatment seemed to be going well, but she couldn't accept that. She began to believe there was some kind of conspiracy against her. In a word, she became completely paranoid. Well, Ally thought, there's paranoid, and then there are times when somebody really is out to get you. So which was it in Kristen's case? She glanced over at Stone, who appeared to be trying to act as though he didn't know what on earth she was talking about, but she could see him efficiently taking mental notes. When you can't remember who you are, she said, turning back to Van de Villiers, and then someone who does know who you are gives you a new fake-eyed entity, I think it's enough to justify paranoia. He was rolling the wheelchair toward the elevator, but abruptly paused. Is that what she's claiming? Good God, I told you she was paranoid, and that should demonstrate it better than anything. Letting her discharge herself and leave the program, to go off unsupervised, was a truly bad idea, but nothing short of physical restraint could have stopped her. And do you have any idea where she is now? Ally asked. I told you. Look, if I knew her whereabouts, don't you think I'd do everything I could to contact her, find out how she is? Right. She reached out and took Stone's hand as they all moved onto the elevator. She could sense his excitement at finally being inside the Dorian Institute, but at that moment, her concentration was drifting, and she felt as though she were slowly beginning to drown in a sea of white. Stone, please don't leave me. Don't let me out of your sight. Something funny is happening and I don't know what it is. Van de Villiers bent over. Alexa, look at me. I want to see your eyes. I think they may be dilating. He waved a hand across her face. Can you see me? It's the fluorescent light. She mumbled, there's too much glare. Could someone please turn them down? I think that's what's wrong. They're giving me a headache. Ally, Stone said, the lights are not very bright in here. We're going down in an elevator. There aren't any floor essence, and the elevator chimed and the door opened. They were in the basement now, where the research lab and the office and the examination rooms were. Deborah, wearing a white lab coat, was standing there silently looking at her. Now there really were fluorescent lights, and she turned away and tried to shield her eyes. God, turn them off. It's so painful. It's like they're shining into the back of my skull. She's started hallucinating, Van de Villiers whispered to Deborah. I've got to draw blood for a test and give her an injection. We need a gurney now. We've got to take her down to the IC. Her condition is progressing much more rapidly than I expected. Ally, is this what you want? Stone demanded. Won't have to do this. Her breath was coming in rapid pulses now, and she was cringing from the light even as she struggled to rise out of the wheelchair. I want to get. She managed to pull herself onto her feet, But then Agden collapsed against Stone as he pulled her to him. As one of the nurses grabbed the newly arrived gurney and pulled it over, Vanda Vliet and Ellen O'Hara seized her out of Stone's arms and lifted her onto it. "You'll have to leave." "Ow," Vanda Vliet said to Stone. "I'm sorry. I'm not going anywhere. I promised her I'd stay by her side, and by God, I intend to do just that." "I'll determine what's best for her," he replied. "Please go up to the reception area. I'll let you know how she is. I'm not leaving. Then I'll call our security and have you removed from the premises." "Stone," Ally said, her eyelids flickering. "It's okay. I want you to tell my mother I'm here. She's in room 213, upstairs, the last time I saw her." "You've got it. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything." She heard him saying that, but then she thought she heard another voice inside her head begging him not to leave. It was the last thought she had before the world went entirely white. Wednesday, April 8, 7:39 p.m. Ellen O'Hara watched the scene with mounting dismay. She'd overheard Dr. Vanda Vliet talking to Debbie about the procedure scheduled for Alexa Hampton. Then she'd checked a schedule that had been put into the database. It turned out that Alexa Hampton had 2 procedures scheduled. The troubling part was, one was identical to the procedure that had been performed on Kristen Starr several months back, or at least so it seemed, and that had resulted in what she just overheard Deborah call the syndrome. By whatever name, it had produced some horrible side effects. Why on earth were they now repeating that with this new patient? Hadn't they learned anything? Carl Vanda Vliet, or whoever ordered this idiotic travesty, was about to put the job of every person at the Dorian Institute at risk. If whatever happened to Kristen was replicated, and the word got out, it was going to be the end for everyone who worked here. Most troubling of all, what about Miss Hampton, who seemed like such a nice person? Did she agree to that experimental procedure? If she knew what had happened to Kristen Starr, surely she wouldn't have. Ellen O'Hara didn't know how she could stop Dr. V from doing what he appeared to be planning to do. The procedure was going to be performed in the laboratory. The only way she could think of to stop it was to try to warn Miss Hampton that what they were about to do was extremely dangerous. But how? Her chart in the database said they were going to keep her quarantined down in the sub-basement. That was specified. On top of all this, Kenji Noda had brought in some unidentified patient this afternoon, wheeled in while strapped to a gurney, and they had taken that patient to the sub-basement. Noda was still down there, and Winston Bartlett had come in and gone down also. The unholy pair. And now they'd be holding Alexa Hampton down there too. Was it possible to get past them and warn her? She was determined to find a way. Chapter 26. Wednesday, April 8, 7:40 p.m. Stone was deeply troubled as he entered the elevator to return to the lobby. He had promised Ally he'd stay by her side, and now he'd let her down. Was this the best he could do? He felt like he had to earn the right to be back in her life, but he seemed to be making a slow start. But he wasn't about to leave the premises until he knew she was okay. Hoping for the best, he reminded himself that although Vanda Vliet was wound pretty tight, he clearly was more than competent. The problem was, he just offered a transparent song and dance when Ally asked him about Kristen. Now it was easy to understand why she'd said she didn't know whether to believe a word he said. But that didn't necessarily preclude him being a Nobel Prize-quality medical genius. In any case, to finally be inside the Dorian Institute was a major coup in his own quest. Up until now, Bartlett's press heavies at BMD had turned back his every attempt to get a first-hand look at the Institute, or an interview with Carl Vanda Vliet. Now, at last, he'd actually seen the man, so after he visited with Ally's mother upstairs, which ought to be interesting, an actual patient interview, he was going to try to keep a low profile and scout the place. Maybe he could finally talk his way into an interview with the celebrated Van de Villiet himself, or at least with some of his research staff. This was definitely the break he'd been waiting for. Finally, he'd have some actua. Reporting to put in the book. When he stepped off the elevator, he noticed that the uniformed security guard looked him over suspiciously. He and Alexa had been waved through the metal detector when they came in, owing to the urgency of her condition. Now he felt as though the guard, a tall, middle-aged black guy with thinning hair, was trying to frisk him with his penetrating eyes. Stone smiled and nodded toward him and headed for the desk in the middle of the reception area. A row. And a number of patients were ambling through the lobby, returning from a room in the back that was identified as dining hall. Some were wearing blue gowns, and most appeared to be in their 60s and 70s. But they all were sprightly and animated as they walked along chatting. Somehow the place felt more like a vacation spa than a clinic. He'd like nothing better than to sit them all down right this minute for an interview. How has the Jerix stem cell procedure affected your condition? Have you had any side effects? But to do that without official permission would undoubtedly get him evicted on the spot. He took a deep breath and walked over to the reception desk. Hi. The woman looked up. She was the same middle-aged Hispanic nurse with bold eye makeup who was there when they came in. Hi, how's your friend feeling? Actually, she's my cousin and I don't know how she's doing because they sent me up here. But she gave me a mission. To keep me occupied. Well, the woman declared with a smile, I'm sure she'll be fine. Dr. Van de Villiet is a miracle worker. So everyone says. He smiled back. My cousin asked me to look in on her mother, Nina Hampton. She is or was in 213. Mrs. Hampton is your aunt? Yeah, right. Whoops, get this act together. Funny, but I always just think of her as my cousin Ally's mother. My own weird way to look at it, I guess. I don't really owe her all that well. Things are not getting off to a great start, he told himself. I don't even believe me. Visits to patients, except by those on a pre-established list, require a photo ID. Well, let's get started. He reached for his wallet and withdrew a driver's license. He made sure his press card was well out of sight. Keep this dumb and innocent as long as possible, he told himself. She glanced at the driver's license, then pointed to the sign-in. Eat. Just sign your name and print it, and then also print your relationship to the patient. I have to say this is unusual. There are regular visiting hours and guests are normally approved in advance by Mrs. Young, who's in charge of security. But you came in under extraordinary circumstances with Miss Hampton, and you're already here, so I don't see the harm. He signed himself in as quickly as possible. Mrs. Hampton is still in room 213. I'll show myself up. Please keep it under 15 minutes. We don't want to tire her out, you understand? Thanks. I really appreciate this. My cousin Ally likes to get an update on. He realized he had momentarily blocked her mother's name her mom as often as possible. He headed for the elevator, trying to contain his excitement. The idea was to keep this as below the radar as possible. Was he about to crack the wall of secrecy that Winston Bartlett had erected around Carl Van de Villiet and the Jerix Corporation? Just as the elevator door was closing, he saw a figure emerge through the security entryway. The man clicked a memory moment from somewhere in the far distant past, but he couldn't place him. As best he could tell, the guy didn't see him. Just keep moving. Don't look back. As he stepped off the elevator onto the second floor, the pale marble floors were lit by small bulbs along the walls. This was a play where medical miracles were supposedly being made to happen, and yet it was lit only with a ghostly half-light. The sounds of televisions emanated from several of the rooms. The nurse's station at the end of the hall was empty, which added the sense of a surreptitious undertaking. He walked quickly to room 213 and tapped lightly on the door. When he heard a bold yes from inside, he opened it and entered. He hadn't seen Nina Hampton in almost 2 decades, but she looked pretty much the way he remembered her. Her hair was surely dyed now, but her face was as square and strong as ever. She was reading a paperback book with a tide that appeared to be Spanish. She looked up and stared at him for a moment, adjusting her glasses. "Hello, Stone, that is you, isn't it? You're older, but you're still a hell of a looker. How did you get in here? Is Ally here too? I haven't seen her since this morning." "Mrs. Hampton, don't tell me you recognize me." "Of course I do. When you and Ally were going out, I confess I didn't hold out much hope that you'd ever amount to anything, but I've been a fan of your columns for a long time, though it took me a while to put it together. That newspaper writer I liked so much was you, the man I didn't think was ambitious enough for my daughter." She appraised him a moment. "Does this mean you two are together again?" Good question, he thought. "And I don't have a clue out the answer." "I wish I knew. Why don't you ask her the next time you see her?" He smiled and walked over. "She wanted me to come up and see how you're doing." "Come up? Is she here now? When she came to say goodbye this morning, I got the impression that she wanted both of us just to get out of here, but I told her that was silly. I'm already feeling so much better." "Really? Well, she's downstairs now and she'll be happy to hear that." He walked over and smiled. "Mrs. Hampton, I came along with her this time to keep an eye on her. Hope you don't mind." "Of course not. And there's another reason I'm here. I want to warn you. I'm writing a book about stem cell procedures, and anything you say to me about your treatment could well end up in it. So don't tell me anything you don't want everybody to hear about." "Are you really writing a book about Dr. V?" She beamed. "That's wonderful. He's a saint. Everyone here says so. He deserves a special place in heaven." "This is great," Stone thought. "I've got my own deep throat. Then could I ask you what you know about what he did, and how you think you've improved?" "I don't really understand what he's doing, but I do know what is happening to me. It's as though my mind was full of fog a lot of the time, but now there's a wind that's blowing it away." And how a shaft of light from the hallway pierced across the room as the door opened. Stone turned to see the man he'd first noticed in the lobby. The man walked past him and marched over to the bed. "Hi, how are you feeling?" "I'm touched." Her visage immediately hardened. "It's thoughtful of you to finally come by and favor your mother with a visit." "That's who he is," Stone finally realized. Ally's kid brother, in his few dealings with the wise-ass brat that Ally used to rant about what was the kid's name. Right, Grant he'd found him devious and pompous. He was particularly deft at cutting ethical corners and using other people any way he could. "Stone," Nina Hampton said, gesturing toward Grant. I know exactly who he is," Grant said, turning around to face Stone. "WB has put out an all-poi. It's alert for you, pal. You've got a hell of a nerve weaseling your way in here. But not to worry, you won't be here long." "I won't have you talking that way in my presence, young man," Nina declared. "Whatever else you may be, I thought I'd raised you to have a civil tongue in your head," Grant replied without taking his eyes off Stone. "He lied to the front desk, Nina. He signed in as Ally's cousin, and that twit brain down there let him get away with it. He got up here by oozing a lie. Now what does that tell you about him?" "It tells me he's creative. This man came with your sister. He's helping take care of her, which is more than can be said about her own brother. This creep is a newspaper reporter, he's here to spy. He's planning to do a hatchet job on the Jerex Corporation, and Mr. Bartlett has expressly forbidden anyone to speak to him. I'm not in your corporation, son, so I guess it's all right for me then. I signed a secrecy agreement with Jerex when you entered the clinical trials. Now maybe you don't remember it, but you did." He turned to Stone. "Nice try, amigo. Now come on, let's go." "You know, Grant, I remember you, and said not very nice recollections. And I remember you too, pal. You were that screwed-up journalism student Ally dated for a while. Thank God she got rid of you." "Sounds like we were awash in mutual admiration," Stone said. "Tell you what, are we going to continue this touching reunion outside, or do I have to call for security and take your trespassing ass out of here in handcuffs? It's entirely up to you." "Grant, I see no reason why I can't talk to him if I want," Nina interjected. "Who I talk to or what I say is nobody's business but mine." "You wouldn't be here if it weren't for me," Grant declared. "So I have a little say-so too." He turned back. "Come on, pal. We're gone." "I'm screwed," Stone told himself. "But what about Ally? If I get kicked out, I'll really be leaving her completely defenseless." Mrs. Hampton, thank you for letting me check up on you, he said quietly. Alexa is downstairs. I think her procedure is starting whether she's ready for it or not. You seem very alert, and if I were you, I'd try to monitor her. Progress as closely as you can. Don't worry, Grant said. I'll be keeping close tabs on it. And now let's go. With no option short of killing him on the spot, Stone followed along, seething. This little creep obviously works for Winston Bartlett. He wished Ally had warned him about that. Grant was bound to have shown up. At some point, they went down the marble staircase, and Grant signaled the security man, who leaped up and opened the front door for them. He probably got a tongue-lashing from Grant, Stone told himself, as they stepped onto the wide paw. Dusk all around them, Grant turned and headed toward the south end and a long wooden bench. Want to tell me what the hell's going on? He said, gesturing toward the bench and then sitting down. WB said you claimed to be writing a book about this project. If that's true, then it's a seriously bad idea. You have no idea what he's capable of if he gets pissed. Oh, I think I'm getting a rough idea, but I'm a little pissed too, Stone said, remaining standing. For example, there's the matter of Kristen Starr. You see, she was terminated from the clinical trials approximately 3 months back. So I was wondering, when is Van de Vliet planning to report her current condition to the NIH? I don't know what you're talking about. His startled voice said otherwise. Oh, I think you do. I saw her today. Then he decided to bluff. She had an interesting tale to tell. Shit, you interviewed Christy? Aw, man, doe. And believe anything he hesitated. What did she say about WB? Tell you what, we'll play 20 questions. You tell me what you think she said, and I'll tell you if you're right or not. Hey, Grant declared, his eyes intense. She wanted to do it, man. Nobody put a gun to her head or anything. She was freaking out after she got sacked. She thought Dr. V could fix her skin, and she couldn't wait to try it. You mean the beta? Take a look at V. And a Vliet. He's a walking testimonial. No side effects for him, so why not? The worst thing that could happen would be nothing, right? So she figured, what did she have to lose? Well, now we all know. The beta, that's? You fuck. Grant bounded to his feet. You don't know the first thing about what I'm talking about, do you? How the fuck did you find out about Kristen anyway? I told you I spoke to her. Well, it was almost true. He'd yelled at her. She's very unsettled just now. But I guess you know that, hey, she was always fucked up, but WB liked all the energy behind that. He looked right past the eating disorders and the coke and the late-night clubs she went. All the time. But man, if you think she's spaced, try her mother. That crazy, Grant, why not level with me? There's something very wrong going on here. I'm in the business of telling the truth, and I've got a keen nose for medical horse. So how about coming clean? If it's good, why not? And if it's bad, it's going to come out eventually anyway. Hasn't Winston Bartlett learned anything from all the screw-ups in Washington? It's not the situation, it's the cover-up. Well, I don't know what Christy did or didn't tell you, so we're not going in that direction. I heard about her little trip downtown this morning. I assume that's probably when you saw her, if in fact you actually did. Right now she's being taken care of for her own good. Being taken care of. So happens I had a close encounter with a couple of her caregivers today. They're taking care of her all right. Look, she used to be WB's girlfriend, okay? He is still very concerned about her. Everybody's really sorry about her situation, but nobody saw it coming. And now he's got some problems of his own. You seem to be pretty heavily involved with Winston Bartlett's personal problems. Yeah, well, the man's been like a father to me, and I think he feels that way too, since he doesn't have a son of his own. Stone let the taunt just hang in the air for a moment. He mainly just wanted to slug the smug little bastard. You don't know how little you know about him or about anything. Someday I may take the trouble to straighten you out. But right now you're not worth the effort. All I care about at the moment is what's going to happen to Ally. Everybody cares what happens to her. A lot depends on it. Dr. V thinks she's our best shot. What? What the hell are you talking about? Stone stared at him through the twilight. What depends on it? Guess you're not as smart as youth. Ink you are. He was up and heading for the parking lot. Come on, pal, time to hit the road. I'm gonna tuck you in. This conversation is terminated, and it never happened anyway. I'll have them unlock the gates for you. Chapter 27. Wednesday, April 8, 8:25 p.m. Alexa watches as the prow of their 41-foot Morgan, Tuma, Stid cuts silently through a placid sea. She vaguely remembers the vessel. It was teak and magnificent. Steve had chartered it, bareboat, for 2 weeks and taken them cruising through the Bahamas. By the end of that time, she felt they could have sailed it around the world, but that was 6 years ago when he was still very much alive. Now the boat feels like a magical carpet taking them someplace together, effortlessly. The Genoa, the mainsail, and the mizzen are all full and blossoming outward even though there's no wind. She's at the helm holding a course toward something white on the horizon, and Steve is with her. He's alive again and he's with her. She feels her body suffused with joy. Then she looks at the reflection of herself in his sunglasses and realizes she's a little girl, still a child. This is all a dream, she realizes, a cruel dream. Then she looks again at the horizon, the blazing white light, and senses that it represents the future, their destiny. Now the sea around them, which had been placid, starts to roil. The wheel is becoming harder to control, and the sun is starting to burn her. In its pitiless glare, she feels herself beginning to age rapidly. She glances at Steve, and she can see his skin starting to shrivel. She senses he is dying, right there before her eyes, but her hands feel glued to the wheel, and she can't let go to try to help him. Now the sea is growing ever more choppy, and a white symbol on the horizon has begun to bob in and out of view. Sometimes she can see the future, and sometimes she can't. Waves are crashing over the sides, inundating the deck, and she feels anxious about what lies up ahead. Will they or get there, and if they do, will she want what she finds? Even more important now, will Steve still be with her? As the waves pound against them both, oddly she doesn't feel wet. Instead, what she feels is a stab of muted pain in her upper chest, pain she knows would be searing if she were to experience its full impact. She looks down to see that the wheel she thought she was holding is gone, and her chest is pierced by the steel mechanism to which it was attached. It has gone all the way through her. Next, a huge wave comes straight over the bow and slams against her and Steve. Her body convulses with pain, and she senses that he is being swept overboard, directly off the stern. She screams at him to hold on, but then he is gone, lost in the dark sea. Now the boat itself is starting to disintegrate, as both masts tip backwards, then come crashing down. Up ahead, the white light that is the future is growing ever more flame-like. It is part of a shoreline she is trying to reach, but now she doesn't think she's going to get there. Around her, the boat's lines and cleats are being swept into the pounding sea. In moments, the boat has disappeared, but she continues on, propelled by some force she cannot see, until she finally crashes onto the rocky shore. It is a chiaroscuro landscape of blacks and whites. Oddly, Stone Ames has appeared and is holding her hand as they make their way along the barren seascape, where everything is hazy and trapped in fog. She thinks she sees figures lurking in the mist around them, but can't make out who they are. Everything is static and frozen in place, like the images of motion on the Grecian urn caught for eternity. She reaches out to touch stone, and her hand passes right through. That's when she realizes the white light and this rocky shoreline represent the other side. Is this what death feels like? She wonders, like the white tunnel drawing you in. But then she has another thought. Maybe she isn't dead at all. Maybe she is in a third place, somewhere suspended between life and death. She looks again at Stone and tells herself they're not dead, they're in some kind of time machine. This voyage is about time. Now time has begun to flow around her like a river. Days, weeks, months, years, they all course by. But she knows it is a chimera. Nothing can make time go faster or slower. Then the bright lights are gone and she feels alone. Very alone, but she isn't. She hears voices around her drifting, echoing, and she tries to understand what they are saying. She's stabilized. We're past the critical phase. Do you want to bring her up now? Not yet. We still don't know how it's going to go. There was a pause and then a male voice. This was the beta too, wasn't it, Carl? Another pause. Well, wasn't it? The injections, that's the first time since. Again the voices drift off. She listens, not sure what she is hearing. She tries to process the word beta but makes no headway. In computer slang, beta means a program that is still being tested. Then she remembers hearing the word just hours earlier. She had been talking to some woman, but she can't remember who. I changed the procedure this time, comes a voice. I injected the special beta enzyme separately from the activated stem cells. Whatever happens will happen at the enzyme's own pace now. And I kept the dosage as low as I could. We'll be monitoring her telomerase levels throughout the day. If there's no rejection, we will be past the first phase. Is the dosage the only difference from before? Comes the other, accusing voice. At this point, David, manipulating the beta is an art, not a science. I'm just attempting to create antigens the way a smallpox vaccination does. Then we'll try to harvest them. This is not really a full-scale beta procedure. I don't plan to do that ever again. There was another long silence. That man who was here with her cousin, did he say? I saw no family resemblance, but he seemed very upset. That's why I had him sent upstairs. I think he's the reporter WB was so concerned about. Anyway, he's gone. Stone. She realizes that's who they're talking about, and now he's gone. She's on her own. Next, the voices drift away for a time into some echo space that mutes them. Finally, though, they come back. This should be adequate for another 4 hours. After that, you'll need a glucose Roman 4 to keep her hydrated. I've already put it on her chart. By then, we should have some idea of which way this is going. I'm praying that this time is going to be the charm, that I've learned how to modulate the enzyme. Is she ready for transfer to IC? Anytime. The voices start drifting away. A fuzziness is enveloping her senses, leaving everything soft and muted. The pain is gone from her body now, and the bright lights around her seem to be dimming. The figures in the white haze on the perimeter are now disappearing, one by one, as though filing out of a room. And now she feels like she's floating, with things moving past her. Then, finally, one lone voice is talking to her, is really talking to her, in a private and unmistakable way. And as she drifts back into the gulf of anesthesia, she listens to words that do not make a lot of sense. A fountain. Through all the ages, we've been looking in the wrong place. It's within us. Together, Alexa, we have this chance. She listens as the voice begins to drift away, yet she feels a genuine sense of closeness to it. She realizes she no longer has control of her destiny, but still she wants to be where she is. Now the sea is coming back, flowing around her, and she tries to remember where she is and why, but all she is aware of is the sea rising until she is engulfed. Chapter 28. Thursday, April 9, 8 o'clock a.m., Stone awoke in his Yorkville apartment nursing a hangover and a lot of regrets. He'd inhaled a triple scotch after driving Ally's Toyota back and parking it on the street the night before. He'd needed it. Yesterday had been a day where, in sequential order, he'd seen a woman who'd lost her memory get kidnapped. But probably, he'd been fired from his day job. He'd finally gotten inside the Dorian Institute, only to blow the opportunity completely. But the most important thing that happened was, he'd rediscovered a woman he'd once been in love with, and he currently didn't have the slightest idea what was happening to her. Thinking back over their last few moments together, when she was being checked in by Van de Villiet and his research team, and he was being hastily sent up to the lobby, Stone suspected that Ally was about to be subjected to something they didn't want anybody to know about. Now he was determined to get back inside the Institute and look out for her. as he pulled himself out of bed and acily made his way into the kitchen to start the coffee. He was trying to decide where to begin. As it happened, he now had all the time in the world. He didn't mind all that much losing his position at the Sentinel. Come on. That was writ across the sky, but he particularly regretted being denied the pleasure of quitting on his own terms, complete with a flamboyant "fuck you very much" farewell speech to the managing editor J. He'd actually been rehearsing it for weeks. The dream of just showing up at the Dorian Institute and walking in was no longer even a fantasy. There was a special, not welcome, mat out for him. Even more than the first time, he'd need a calling card. That had to be Kristen Starr. She clearly held the key to whatever it was Winston Bartlett and Carl Van de Villiet were trying to cover up. But how to find her? The only real lead he had was the apartment she'd come back to, apparently returning like a genetically programmed salmon going back upstream, but not really knowing why. Okay, why not go back down there and look around again, only do it thoroughly? He and Ally hadn't had time to do much more than a cursory look around. The specter of the knives in the walls still haunted him. But how to get in? Then he remembered that Ally had been given the key by Kristen's spacey subtenant, Cindy, the one who was renting the ground floor apartment. Did she leave that key at her? A seedy space office, or did she put it on her key ring? Her car keys were lying on the table by the door, where he'd tossed them last night. He walked over and checked them out. There were several house keys on the ring in addition to her Toyo. But a keys. Could she have put Kristen's key on the ring too? Or did she stash it in her desk at seedy space? Swing by the apartment and try these. He decided maybe I'll get lucky. As he headed for the shower, a cup of black Jamaican coffee in hand, he thought again about the last thing Alexa's good-for-nothing brother Grant had said, something about how Alexa was their best shot. Whatever that meant, it couldn't be good. By 9 o'clock he had showered, shaved, and was in Ally's Toyota, headed for West 11th Street. As he turned right on 14th, he had a fresh idea. Kristen's phone was still working, at least as of yesterday. So did she have speed dial, a memory bank of numbers? That could be a gold mine of the people closest to her. But if not, there were other tricks, ways of getting phone information. There might even be information in the phone itself. Who do you get on redial, and who do you get with *69, the last number that dialed in? The last number that dialed in would probably be the Japanese guy who left a message and then kidnapped her. But the last call out could be interesting. He had a nagging feeling that this wasn't the best way to be spending his morning, but he couldn't immediately think of anything else. West 11th Street was comparatively empty, so he had no trouble securing a parking space. After he'd turned off the engine, he looked at Ally's key set again. Well, there were 4 other keys on it besides the Toyota keys. Give it a shot. He got out and locked the car and walked up the steps. It was a perfect spring morning, cool and crisp, and this part of the village was quiet and residential. He found himself envying the owners of these beautiful 19th-century townhouses. There was something so dignified and secure about them. Then he saw a man emerge from the apartment below the stoop, just a few feet from where he was. Standing, "Hi. How's Cindy?" he called down, hoping the social gesture would let the guy know he wasn't about to do a second-story number on Kristen's townhouse. The man, who looked to be in his late 20s, was dressed in a black suit, with long blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, and carried a shoulder bag that appeared to be serving as a briefcase. He stared at Stone with a puzzled look. "Who?" "I was here yesterday and a woman named Cindy, friend of Kristen's. Ed, she was leasing the garden apartment. I was just wondering, I'm sorry. Maybe you have the wrong address. I've had this place for almost a year and a half now." He was moving on down the street as he called back over his shoulder. "Good luck. What the hell is going on?" He looked up and checked the number. "Yep, it's 217. Cindy had definitely gone into that apartment yesterday and talked convincingly about living there and working at the E station. She Evan had keys to Kristen's place, so who the hell was that guy? He looked back, but now he had disappeared. Did I just imagine that? He puzzled. He moved up the steps to the heavy white wood door and started trying keys. The first one wouldn't enter the lock, nor would the second. The third key entered but would not turn. Okay, last chance. He inserted the fourth and it seemed to stick. But he gave it a wiggle and voila, he was in. Thanks, ally. But when he stepped through the door and switched on the light, he could only stare in disbelief. The apartment had been completely cleared out. The white walls, which had been covered with knifed photos of Kristen only yesterday, were now blank. Even the few pieces of furniture were gone. Jesus, I don't believe this. His voice echoed off the empty marble mantelpiece and bounced across the room. He looked around. Since late yesterday, somebody had come in and cleaned out the place. Thoroughly. Any hopes of finding old letters, an address book, anything personal were gone. He knew immediately that he had been outsmarted. Kristen Starr and now her friend Cindy had officially ceased to exist. Cindy might still be at E, but she was going to be terrified and subject to massive memory loss on the subject of Kristen. But wait a second. They left the phone. The answering machine is gone, but maybe they didn't realize that phones can have memories and can sometimes tell tales. That might be worth a try, but check out the place first. He walked into the kitchen alcove and gazed around, not entirely sure what he was looking for. The main thing would be some phone numbers and addresses. He opened the refrigerator and peered in. It was still running and contained 2 unopened jars of British marmalade and an empty quart jar with traces of orange juice bordered by mold. The freezer compartment was entirely bare. The 2 kitchen cabinets above the stove had been similarly emptied. He gave them a cursory look, then came back and followed a hallway to a bathroom in the back. When he opened the medicine chest above the sink and peered in, he initially thought it was empty with a pile of wadded up Kleenex on the bottom shelf. He was pulling that out when he realized that the tissue had been wadded around an empty prescription drug vial. Kristen Starr had prescription number 378,030. It was for Ibinol, whatever that was, probably some kind of screwed-up diet pill, and it had been filled 5 months ago. It had been delivered from Grove Pharmacy on 7th Avenue to here, 217 West 11th Street. The address was pasted on a sticker on the back. He thought. After she left, rather than transferring the prescription, what if they just had subsequent refills delivered to some other address? There's a long shot that Grove Pharmacy might have a new address for the prescription number. Okay, it would be a very long shot, but still. Unless, of course, her new address had been the Dorian Institute. In that case, the prescription would undoubtedly have been discontinued once she became a patient. He itched for his cell phone to call the drugstore. Shit, I forgot it. Damn hangover. He walked back into the living room and stared at Kristen's phone. If it was still working, he could call Grove Pharmacy and no idiot that would wipe out any number stored in the redial function. Without a cell, the best thing to do is just go over there and check with the pharmacist in person. He settled yoga style onto the hardwood floor next to the phone and stared at it. What if the line is already disconnected? Why did whoever cleaned this place out leave it here? The phone, of all things. It rang. He jumped a foot off the floor and then stared at it. A series of reasons flashed through his mind. 1, they know I'm here and they going to warn me again to back off. 2, they know I'm here and the last incoming call here was from a number they don't want me to know about. I pick this up and I wipe out any chance of ever finding out what it was. Don't answer it. This phone call is not intended to be helpful. Not picking up the phone was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but he was determined to be disciplined. He counted 11 rings, and then he couldn't take it anymore and reached for the receiver. Stopped, thank God. His hand froze in midair. The timing had been a split-second salvation, all right, he thought. Time to find out if I just totally screwed up. Time to dial. He got his pen and notebook poised and then lifted the black receiver. He knew from the message on her machine yesterday that somebody had called her just before he got there. Or maybe whoever came and cleaned out her apartment had received a phone call while they were here. Possibly from who ever sent them. A checkup call, who knew? But give it a shot. He hit the code. A mechanical voice came on immediately. Your last call was from area code 212, number 555 to 3935. If you would like for me to connect you, please push go for it, he said aloud, scribbling down the number and then following the instruction. At that moment, somebody's cell phone began to ring just outside the front door. Oh shit. It was just too big a coincidence. After 2 rings it stopped and he heard the voice of Winston Bartlett, both outside the front door and in his ear. Yes. He was too startled to respond, but he didn't need to, because an instant later, he also heard the sound of a key and then the front door opened. A shaft of daylight shot across the room as Bartlett took one look and exploded. Damn, so it's true. How the hell did, hey, come on in, Stone said, trying to recover for some poise and take marginal control of the situation. I'm here by permission. The downstairs tenant, who you just evicted or kidnapped too, gave me her key. You don't get it, do you? I told you to keep, but we have Inns of progress. I know all about Kristen. Well, that was hardly the case, but it never hurt to start off with a bluff to see how far you could get. That's why I'm here. The question is, when are we going to start talking to each other? Because I'm putting together a hell of a story. I don't fucking believe this. Bartlett slammed the door. By the way, a special thanks for getting me sacked at the Sentinel. Now, I'll have the leisure to concentrate full-time on the stem cell book. And Jerex, I warned you, but you wouldn't fucking listen. He was peering around the living room as though searching for clues to explain why nothing was going right. Like I said, I talked to Kristen yesterday. Stone stood his ground. And she's not a happy person. If you bring her into this, Bartlett glared at him. I can't imagine what makes you think you can just run roughshod through my business and my life. Here's how it is. You can abuse me or you can ooze me. Keep in mind I'm accustomed to working for people who buy ink by the barrel. As I tried to explain before, if you won't let me get at the whole truth, I may end up spreading half-truths. Bartlett walked across the room and ran his fingers along the marble mantelpiece above the fireplace. You know, he said, turning back, up until now you've never asked me for anything. I have to say I've always admired that, but I'm curious why. Maybe I thought? It was your place to come to me, Stone said, puzzled by the left turn the conversation had suddenly taken. You know, I have a life of my own. I have an 11-year-old daughter you've never seen or apparently care to see. I'm wondering. What that says about you. Your granddaughter's name, by the way, is, I know her name. I know quite a bit about our blood ties or lack of. Well, I'd bet she'd be just thrilled by that. Incidentally, she doesn't know a goddamn thing about you. And I'd just as soon keep it that way. I knew having this conversation was a fucking mistake. This is why I never had it. Any real son of mine has got to have some of my character, my stature. You're a bean counter. If you had any character, you wouldn't be hiding behind all this secrecy. I try to tell the truth as much and as often as I can. That's my take on character. What we're doing at Jerex is going to change the history of the world. We're at the brink of things and kind has only dreamed about, and I've taken all the risks. In fact, I took the biggest risk of all personally. There's a lot going on that you don't know a damned thing about. We're on the edge of all the more reason you should want the hoe. Well, story told, Stone interjected. Yes, stem cell technology is going to change everything, but you can't just tell half the story. I want it to work, but I'm a truth seeker. I want to find out what, if anything, can go wrong too. You've been using people, first Kristen, and now I'm beginning to fear Ally to take your risks for you. I mean, what's going on? Why did you send somebody down to obliterate all evidence of Kristen? And now Cindy, that girl. Downstairs? My God, she somehow vanished too. Whatever happened to Kristen to make it come to this? What may or may not have gone wrong is nothing that can't be made right. No great medical advance ever succeeded in a direct line. Don't need the sales pitch, Stone said. I agree it's going to revolutionize medicine, but you can't. That's why you'll never be a son of mine. You always think small. This is about more than mere medicine. It's about doing the one thing and kind has never been able to do. I am this close. Nothing is going to be allowed to destroy this chance, not even you, my own flesh and blood." "Am I that?" Stone asked, feeling an unexpected satisfaction. "Your own flesh and blood?" "That is something," Bartlett said, "we are about to discover. Whether we are made of the same thing, the best way for you to understand what's going on here is to do what I've done. Have the beta procedure, show me you've got the balls." "The beta procedure? It might help if I knew what it is." "Why don't I just show you?" Bartlett said. "You want to be on the inside, see everything up close? Fine. I think the time has come. You seem determined to stick your nose into what I'm doing. You weaseled your way into the Institute, and now you show up here. So I guess it's time you were an insider all the way." "Good, maybe then I can start getting some answers. For example, was changing Kristen's name part of the NIH study?" Stone turned to face him. "Or is it your way to hide one of your mistakes? Quite frankly, that's none of your goddamn business." "Well, let me tell you what is my business. Ally Hampton is a particular friend of mine. I damned well want to know whether she's scheduled to undergo the same procedure as Kristen. I don't know what you and Van de Vliet did to Kristen, but if you turn Ally into a zombie too, I think we'll continue this discussion later." He pulled his cell phone out of a jacket pocket, flipped it open, and punched a memory number. "Ken, could you and Jake please come in? We have the problem I was afraid we had." He flipped the phone shut and turned back to Stone. "Carl entered Miss Hampton and her mother into the clinical trials at the last minute as a special favor. She's in no danger." Now Stone saw two men come through the front door. One was the tall Japanese man who had slugged him the day before. "Shit, I need this. Is he going to work me over again?" The other guy was dressed in white, as though he were an orderly or nurse. Stone noticed he had a plastic syringe in his right hand. "Ken, could you and Jake please take care of this? He'll be going with us." Stone examined the three of them. Well, he thought, guess I'm going to be back inside the Dorian Institute after all. Look, there's no need for excessive violence here. We could just set some ground rules for this situation. The Japanese man named Ken walked over and seized him around the neck, while at the same time pulling his right arm around behind him, a decisive hammerlock. "You fucker," Stone choked out. The man Bartlett had called Jake, the one in white, shoved a needle into his arm. "This could be the experience you've been looking for," Bartlett said. "You've been pursuing me like a dog chasing a car. Now we're about to see if you're man enough to handle the consequences when you've caught it." "You're damned right I'll handle it," he tried to say. But he wasn't sure if he actually got it said. The void was closing in so fast. Chapter 29. Thursday, April 9, 10:33 p.m. "Grant, is that you?" Ally squinted in the semi-dark of the room, finally making out the silhouette. He was sitting in a chair beside her bed, and his face was troubled, reminding her of when he'd had a bad day in high school. "Am I dreaming again?" She puzzled. The clock on the wall told her that this was a late hour for whatever he was up to now. "It's me," he said, his voice low, just above a whisper. The door behind him, she noticed, was shut. "Welcome back to the world. They moved you upstairs just for tonight. This is the first chance I've had to get near you." She was still wondering where she was, what day it was. The walls were an icy blue, illuminated only by the silver and green glow of the bank of CRT screens that now monitored her heart and her respiration. He lifted her head off the pillow and for a moment looked past Grant, examining the screen of the heart monitor. It was a phonocardiogram. She knew what to look for. Over the years, she'd learned to interpret every irregular pulse, every errant amplitude, but now the sonic abnormalities that typically characterized her stenosis, the struggle of her heart's scarred valve to maintain adequate coronary output, were significantly damped. There'd always been murmurs. Abnormal heart? Ounds as long as she could remember, so what did this mean? Had the damaged valve already begun restoring and strengthening itself while she slept? Or was this just more of some dream, Why was she in this hospital anyway, hooked up to Ma? Knitters, she still couldn't remember exactly. What? She tried to rise up out of the bed. Again she wondered, was Grant real or some chimera? Then she realized she was strapped in, though the straps were held only with black Velcro. As she started to pull them open, she noticed she had a Roman 4 needle in her arm, with a plastic tube that led to a bag of liquid suspended from a hook above her head. More annoying, however, was the checkerboard of taped-on sensors. On her upper body, for the ongoing phonocardiogram, she looked at all the tubes and connected wires and felt like a laboratory animal in the middle of an experiment. Ally, you're at the Dorian Institute, remember? Dr. Van de Villi. At Stem Cell Clinical Trials, Nina's here too? Oh, that rang a bell, sort of. What? What day is it? He told her. You've been under sedation since late yesterday, Ally, but Dr. V says your test data show you're responding. Mom's here, right? Now things were starting to come back. How's she doing? He's talking about discharging her by the end of next week, even before the NIH clinical trials are officially over. Grant tried a smile. By then, he thinks the procedure will have replaced enough tissue in her brain that she might not even need a caregiver. She's doing crosswords again. Need I say more? My God. Now she remembered how on again, off again Nina's mind had been when she brought her out to the Institute. Had she really been given a second chance, and so quickly? If so, it was truly astonishing. But now she found herself staring at Grant, mesmerized. Something about him seemed oddly off. Grant, what's going on with you? He was hesitating. I've been thinking about everything. Now I really wish I hadn't done what I did. What are you talking about? This kind of revisionist remorse didn't sound like the... Grant, she knew. Have you seen Kristen? They said you know about her, were asking about her. Then he stepped back. Do you know about her, Kristen? She tried to remember, is that the woman everybody? Her mother had come to the Institute? With a pistol trying to find her? Then she was kidnapped. It's the syndrome, Grant went on. She wanted the beta procedure and Dr. V finally agreed, but nobody expected anything to happen like what eventually did. That's why WB went ahead and had it too. Beta. Now she remembered that Kristen had mumbled something about that word. Ally, I got you into, when I told WB, that I thought you and he had the same rare blood type. He wanted to bring you into the program. You mean for my heart? He looked away and his eyes grew pained. Well, that's part of it. There's another part they haven't told you about. What's that? Antibodies. They think there's a chance it could be made to develop them, and then they could use them to help WB. He doesn't have the syndrome yet, but it's probably just a matter of time. What, she puzzled, is he talking about? What antibodies? What syndrome? He was weak, and she wasn't sure her mind was fully functional. But after what appeared to be the miracle of her heart, she was willing to forsake a certain amount of momentary rationality. Then more memory started returning. Kristen. What about her? I saw Ally. The syndrome started with her over 4 months ago. At first they didn't fully realize how serious, but now it's getting worse every day. He paused and turned away. Look, I've been thinking, I'm real. He's sorry that I brought you into this. What if something goes wrong? What do you mean? If you could see Kristen now, you'd understand. Where is she? Is she still wherever they're hiding her? No. He turned back. Kristen, after what happened. Yesterday, she had to be brought back out here. There's a ward downstairs, on the floor below the offices and lab. That's kind of like an intensive care unit. That's where you were until tonight. But you can't go back down there on your own. Nah. Even the nurses can go without a special authorization, which is never given. But if Kristen is Ally, you're the one I'm worried about. I thought what they were going to do to you was safe. But last night I heard them all talking, and I think you could be in serious danger. They don't actually know what the consequences of what they're doing will be. You need to get out of here and at least get the real story. I don't want this on my hands. Truthfully, there could be some deep legal shit coming out of all this. I can think of at least 3 felonies. I don't want any part of that liability, and I want you to testify that I got you out of here if it ever comes to that. Finally, the 8th story, she thought. He's afraid he's about to be an accomplice in a criminal conspiracy. He's getting cold feet. Grant, do something for me. Get me unplugged, all these sensors. I want to go see her for myself. Ally, forget it. To begin with, I can't unplug you. Only a nurse can do that, and I don't want to. You've got catheters in places then I'll get a nurse to come and do it. I'll say I need to go to the bathroom. That should get me unhooked. Annoyed. She looked around. Where's the buzzer? There has to be one somewhere. Then she spotted a set of controls attached to the bed, and sure enough, there was a red button. What else could it be? She pushed it, and a light came on above her door. Moments later, a short blue-haired woman with the name Marion sewn into her white uniform opened the door and came striding in, flicking on the fluorescent overheads. My, we're looking well, she declared, ignoring Grant. I'm glad you're finally Ake, he told us to call him the Minute. They're all saying you and your mother must have special genes. You've both been such terrific patients. He'd been keeping you sedated, but he discontinued that medication this afternoon. He wanted you to wake up with your mind clear. Well, I'd really like to get up and go to the bathroom and get something to eat, Ally said mainly. I just want to get out of this bed for a stretch before I start developing bed sores. I'm feeling strong, for now at least. Can you unhook some of these wires and suction cups? And I certainly don't need that Roman 4. I'm so hungry I could inhale a quart of ice cream in one gulp. Yes, of course, Marion said and began dismantling the intravenous tubes. We only monitor you and hydrate you when you're not conscious. The standard procedure is to let you get up and start getting some exercise as soon as possible. You should be careful, though, because at this point you're not as strong as you think. Changes are taking place in your body that require a lot of your energy. If you feel up to it, you could walk around for a couple of minutes, but you shouldn't let yourself get tired. As Marion continued now removing the tapeton sensors, Ally looked up and saw another uniformed nurse standing in the doorway. She also was middle-aged with prematurely gray hair, and she was holding a syringe. May I come in? She asked. At the stage, he needs a blood sample every 3 hours. Just 20 cc's. Ally watched as the new nurse quickly and deftly took a small sample of blood. Then she capped it off and turned to leave. I need to centrifuge this immediately. And she was gone, and Marion finished removing the Roman 4 tube and catheter and all the tapeton electrodes. If you want to get up and use the bathroom and walk around a little, I'm sure it would be all right. I'll come back in a few minutes and bring you a tray with a nice healthy bowl of broth. The moment she was out the door, Ally turned to Grant. I want to see Kristen. Now? I thought the first thing you wanted was to go to the bathroom. I'll get to that. You said? She was downstairs somewhere. How do I get there? It's in the security zone, he said. You're not authorized. You're a big shot around here. Winston Bartlett's right-hand flunky, so why don't you authorize me yourself? Ally, you know. I can't do that. Then take me there. I don't want to see Kristen anymore, he declared, biting his lip. She's completely lost. Everything. I could deal with it until I saw her this morning. It's just too much. Has he let her mother see her? Are you kidding? Letting that psycho anywhere near her is the last thing anybody's going to do. Then get me in, damn it. Ally, forget about it. Why? He hesitated as though marshaling his thoughts. Sis, he said innocently, there are only so many risks I can take for you, and they have to be about something that matters. Forget about Kristen. Nothing can save her now. But I'm offering to help you get out of here before they go any further. I can't be in helping you, but they've started you down a road that you don't want to go, believe me. Got you into this, but if there's still time, I want to try to help get you out. She didn't know what was going on, but if Grant of all people was freaked about what Carl van de Villiet had in store for her, then maybe she'd better take it seriously. But she was through relying on him for anything. Okay, but I want to call somebody to come and get me. Are you referring to that reporter by any chance? He asked. The guy who drove you here? WB hates him. Yes, she was puzzled that he would know about Stone. How do you, Bartlett has him? What do you mean? He's radioactive now? I actually kicked him out of here myself yesterday. This is not a moment for press freedom. He could screw up everything. WB said he's doing a book. No way is that guy going to be allowed human contact with anybody. The sale of Jerex is in the bank. He had a run-in with Bartlett in the city and they took him somewhere. I don't know the location, and I don't want to know. Oh my God. He's most likely okay. It's just temporary safekeeping. All the more reason I'm not leaving till I see Kristen. There's no way you're going to get into where they're keeping her, ally. All right. There was no arguing with him when he was this freaked. What do you want me to do? He pulled plastic card out of his jacket pocket. It was white, with the Jerex Corporation embossed on one side and a magnetic strip on the other. This is a master key to this place. Because of security, you can't just go out the front through the lobby. But if you take the elevator down to the first floor of the basement, where the lab is, there's a fire exit there in the back that opens onto a path down to the lake. If you'll go out that door and wait right there, I'll come around and get you to the parking lot. I know a way that will miss their surveillance cameras. I'm scheduled to go back to the city now and I'll take you with me. But if I wanted to see Kristen, you'd have to go into the laboratory and then take the elevator that's inside there. Don't even think about it. It's way too risky. She looked at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Had he become a new man, finally caring about somebody other than himself, or had a glimpse of whatever happened to Kristen scared the hell out him and awakened the specter of being part of a felonious enterprise? Why are you doing this? To make up for a few things, he said, turning to leave. With that, he walked out and quietly closed the door. That remains to be seen, she told herself. She went to the bathroom, then put on a bathrobe and headed out into the hallway. The nurse's station was not occupied. Marion was still in the kitchen on the first floor, presumably. She was feeling shaky, not nearly as strong as she'd initially thought she was, but she pressed on, taking the elevator, her first use of Grant's Jerex master key. She bypassed the first floor and an instant later she was stepping into the basement's laboratory area. At the moment, it appeared to be entirely deserted, though the fluorescent lights bathed the space in a stark, pitiless light. Down the hall was Dr. Van de Villiet's office and the examining room where she and her mother had gone when they were being admitted. At this time of night, everything was closed and probably locked. She turned and looked at the forbidding entryway to the glass-enclosed laboratory. Through the transparent walls, she could see the dim glow of CRT screens and incubators filled with Petri dishes. And there at the back was, could her eyes be trusted, the outline of an elevator door. She hadn't noticed it until this minute. It seemed to be built with a nod toward camouflage. It could lead to Kristen, she told herself. Find out what Grant is so freaked about. He can wait a couple of minutes. She was starting to feel even weaker, but she pressed on. Next to the heavy steel, high-security airlock leading into the laboratory was a card reader, and she swiped the white card through the slot. The airlock opened silent and perfunctory. When she went through, the door behind her automatically closed, and then the hermetically sealed door in front of her opened. She was in. Next, a bright fluorescent light clicked on all by itself. Jesus. Maybe it was connected to a motion sensor, or on a timer. Then she looked around. This, she thought, is the place where the Jerex Corporation has supposedly changed medical history. What was created in this very room had, if Grant was telling the truth, saved her mother's sanity. And if she could believe the monitors she had looked at in her room, her own heart condition had big to be reversed after a lifetime of progressive decline. Yet something about it had been pushed too far. Somewhere in the midst of this miracle, the Jerex Corporation had done something so obscene no one could even talk about it. She looked around the laboratory, wishing she could understand what she was seeing. It smelled like solvent, acetone, with a mingling of more pungent fumes. The black slate laboratory workbenches were spotlessly hygienic and equipped with several large microscopes that featured flat panel screens. She noticed a heavy server computer at the back, presumably networked to all the terminals in the building. And then she remembered that Van de Villiet had once spoken of computer simulations. Someday soon, she told herself, she was going to understand what really was going on here, but for now she headed for the elevator. Another zip of Grant's white card and the door opened. There was indeed a floor below the laboratory, and she pushed the button. The Dorian Institute was all about security, but this sub-basement area was doubly secure. After a quick trip down, the elevator door opened onto another airlock chamber. This an exit from the pressurized environment of the laboratory. Why, she wondered, had no one spotted her yet? Perhaps this part of the clinic was such a lockdown that nurses and guards weren't necessary. As she stepped from the airlock, she was in a hallway. She walked down and tried the first unmarked door. It was locked, but then she saw the slot for her card. She slipped it in and the door opened automatically. The room she entered had a row of beds, each shrouded in a curtain. As she walked down the center aisle, she realized that only one of the beds was occupied. And yes, it was Kristen. She was lying there, and when Ally slid back the curtain, her eyes clicked open, startled. "Hi, don't be afraid. I'm a friend," she quietly finished, drawing the curtain aside. Now, the once breezy Kristen Starr was staring at her with angry eyes, the false bravado of a frightened child. And she looked much younger than she had in the headshot she'd attached to the walls of her townhouse with steak knives. She said nothing for a moment, then she mouthed, "Who are you?" "I talked to you on the phone a couple of days ago," Ally said, not sure herself exactly when it was. "When you went down to your place on West 11th Street. "I don't know you," she mouthed again, this time with a slight whisper. "My name is Alexa Hampton." She moved next to her so she could keep her voice down. "I'm an interior designer. I once did an apartment for you in Chelsea." "I'm out to go on a journey," she whispered. "I don't remember you, but maybe you're the one who's going with me." There was something otherworldly and chilling about her voice. "What journey do you? We were going to go away. That's what he promised." "Just us two? Well, I'm ready. I want to go out and play, but he doesn't care anymore. He just wants me to disappear. So that's what I'll do. Only we'll do it together, you and me." She reached up from her bed and ran a finger across Ally's face. "Will you take me out of here? He promised me everything, that I could get it all back. But now I know he didn't care. He was just using me." She stopped, then gave a cruel laugh from the back of her throat. "But now it's going to happen to him too, I can tell. That's why he doesn't want to see me anymore. He doesn't want to see what's in store for him." What has happened? Ally wondered. It sounds like some kind of bizarre experiment gone wrong. "Won't you come with me?" Kristen went on. "We'll go to a place nobody has ever been to before. It'll be just us." Her seductive eyes, at once plaintive and demanding, would have lured anyone toward wherever she wanted to go. For a careless moment, Ally found herself wanting to follow them. No, this is madness. Or, Ally thought with horror, is she seeing something in me that I can't see? "Kristen, listen to me, please. I think it's very possible I've just had a stem cell procedure for my heart. I don't know if it's like what you had, but I want to know what happened to you." "Don't do it," she mumbled, seemed to come back to a kind of reality. "Just get out of here now. After it starts, it gives you shots and things, but nothing works." Ally felt her consciousness start to wobble. She reached out and seized the edge of the bed for support. "Kristen, talk to me." Her eyes went blank again, and Ally could just barely make out what she mumbled next. In fact, all she could catch were random words that only drifted through her consciousness and failed to stick or make any sense. It was as though Kristen were in a stance and sleepwalking among the words of some alien language. "Young," Kristen seemed to say. "You want to stay? Old is so horrible. Time. You're young and then suddenly you're old and it turns out you can't." Ally heard the words, but they didn't make any sense. "I'm sorry, Kristen, I'm feeling a little dizzy." "It started," she said, abruptly coherent again and focusing in on Ally. "That's how it began with me. At first they said everything was okay and then it wasn't." "What are you talking about?" "It's happening throughout my body," she sobbed. "I've stopped having periods and I'm getting acne. Everything is changing." The words drifted through space, and Ally felt like she was hallucinating in a place where time was sliding sideways. The images were all retro, things from her past that floated through her vision in reverse chronological order. That was it. In her mind, time was going backwards, but was it just in her mind? She looked again at Kristen and gasped. Finally, she understood the horror of what was really happening. "Oh my God. I got here as soon as I could after they called me," came a voice from the doorway. She turned and saw Carl van de Vliet, together with the nurse. "Arian, you really shouldn't be down here. I don't know who gave you a card, but we've brought a wheelchair. You really should be resting." Marian rolled the chair through the door and expertly plucked the card from the reader. "Now please sit down." She said, "We all just want to be on the safe side, don't we? I'll need to give you a sedative." Ally looked at van de Vliet, wanting to strangle him. "No, you're not giving me a damned sedative. I don't want to be on the safe side. I want the truth, and I want it now." Chapter 30. Thursday, April 9, 11:16 p.m. "Let's go into the lab to talk," van de Vliet said. "I'm very sorry. I wasn't here when you came out of sedation, but Marian called me at home as I'd told her to do, and I came in as quickly as I could. I've got a place on the lake, just down the road, so I'm never far away." He was rolling through the airlock door, Marian behind them. Then they took the elevator up. She was furious that Kristen was being left behind like an abandoned casualty of war. Ally also was reminding herself about her appointment with Gray. And to get the hell out. But her mind was having trouble holding a lot of thoughts at once. He pushed her wheelchair into the section of the laboratory where a line of computer terminals was stationed. After he'd fluffed a pillow behind her head and turned off some of the glaring fluorescence, he began. "Alexa, this is a delicate time for you. We need to get you upstairs as quickly as possible and feed you some broth and put you back to bed. However, I want very much to give you an update on the status of your treatment. The headline is, it's going very well. We fused some of the telomerase enzyme with your existing stem cells, and your response was immediate. In fact, it appears the new heart tissue has reached critical mass and has already begun replicating itself. We've learned to expect the unexpected around here, but your response has significantly exceeded our simulations." He turned to Marian and asked her to go up and make sure Alexa's bedding had been changed. "We'll be up in a second, and please make sure that bowl of broth is ready and waiting." After she departed through the airlock, he walked over to a lab bench and checked the numbers that were scrolling on a CRT. "A screen. All right," Ally said, "talk to me. I just saw Kristen. I'm still not sure if I believe what I think is happening, but I want the real story and I want it now. That's part of what I need to discuss with you." He glanced away for a long moment, a pained expression on his face, seeming to collect his thoughts. Finally, he turned back. "You see, the clinical trials have demonstrated that we can use the telomerase enzyme to immortalize a patient's own stem cells and then rejuvenate their brain or liver, or even their heart. So the next question that's hanging out there in space is obvious. What would happen if we could find a way to generalize the enzyme and disperse it throughout someone's entire body, not restricting it to just one organ, and not just regenerate? This question had actually passed fleetingly through her consciousness, though not fully articulated. It had taken the form of wondering where the use of these immortal cells could eventually lead. The trick would be to have just enough enzyme in your bloodstream to replace senescent cells as they are about to but not so much that healthy cells are replaced. He paused, searching for a metaphor. If we thought of the process of cell senescence as something inexorable and steady, like a treadmill, then what we want to do is run just fast enough to stay in one place. This whole thing does sound like Alice in Wonderland. Yes, well, if we could do that, then it's possible, just possible, that one's entire body would simply begin regenerating itself instead of aging. Not just your skin, all of you. That's the theory behind what we've called the beta procedure. But is that something you ethically ought to be doing? She said, feeling a sense of dismay of playing God. Isn't that going too far? Frankly, I'm beginning to agree with you, but there are others who ask, how far is too far? Half the medicines we now have are intended to trick the body's responses somehow, or to meddle in some other way, turning off stop-and-go signals at the cellular level. For example, some birth control pills make your body think you're already pregnant. They trick our natural mechanisms. That kind of thing is commonplace in medicine today, but our research is poised for the next level to answer the question of how long we can actually live. So here's the argument. There's no reason the human lifespan has to be what it is. In some unhealthy nations, the average citizen doesn't even reach 60. Whereas in others, like the United States and Japan, the mean is already well past 70. So what is right? What is reasonable? 100, 200. It's entirely possible to believe we could live productive lives at least twice as long as we do now. And you think we should do this? The world would be thrown into a chaos. But look at the incredible cure rate we've already effected here using the telomerase enzyme. When our clinical trials for the NIH are announced, it will be the medical equivalent of the shot heard round the world. Nothing we know will ever be the same again. That's where you should leave it. To go further is obscene. I fear recent events may have proved you right. Against my better judgment, I went ahead and experimented with the beta procedure. And the results thus far have turned out to be disastrous. I guess you're referring to Kristen. One day I casually mentioned the beta to Winston Bartlett, and without telling me, he brought it up with Kristen. She insisted on trying it. His expression grew increasingly pained. I want you to know I was against it. I warned her that it was highly experimental, that I could not guarantee what the side effects might be, but she begged me to do it anyway. Then Bartlett essentially ordered me to do it. So what happened? He grimaced. I got the dosage wrong, that's my best guess. After I performed the beta on Kristen, the enzyme was stable in her for over 2 months and appeared to be having an effect. All signs of aging abruptly stopped. It gave me a false sense of confidence. Also, there were no side effects. That was when Bartlett wanted to try it too, so I went ahead with him. But then, to my horror, she started evincing side effects. I'll believe the dosage I gave her was badly calibrated. It was too high by how much I think I've finally determined, and the enzyme eventually began replicating too rapidly. It got away from me. He paused. What happened to Kristen? We now call the syndrome, for lack of a better name, and it's about to happen to Bartlett. But what does all this have to do with me? Why was I brought out here with all kinds of bribes and pressure, and do you want a simple answer of excruciating honesty? It would be helpful. The simple answer is Winston Bartlett has an extremely rare blood type. It's you have the same. How did you know your brother? You see, I need to try to develop antibodies to the telomerase enzyme that won't be rejected by his immune system. I think there's an outside chance that I could culture antibodies taken from someone with the same blood type and use them to arrest the rampant multiplying of telomerase. Is enzyme about to begin in Bartlett's blood? I'm here because you're using me. She couldn't believe her ears. And Grant had set it up. No wonder he was finally feeling guilty. I just need to borrow your immune system for a few days. It's very safe. I don't think so. I'm out of here. Actually, the procedure is already underway. While Deborah was taking your last blood sample, she also injected a minuscule amount of the telomerase enzyme in active 4. The proprietary version used in the beta into your bloodstream. Don't worry, it's perfectly safe. The dosage was so minute that there's no way it could have any effect on you. You have got to be kidding. My God, she thought I could soothe hell out of don't worry. Think of it like a smallpox vaccination. He paused. Now, though, I have to tell you that I just learned the initial dosage probably didn't do the trick. The amount of antibodies created was unfortunately minuscule, which means we need to go to a slightly higher infusion, but again, don't worry, it's still safe. I can't believe I'm hearing this, she said finally, gasping for air in her fury. You didn't ask, Alexa, he cut in. Right now, I have something like 2 weeks left to try to head off the syndrome in Winston Bartlett. If we achieve that, then I'm hopeful the antibodies he creates can be successfully used to start reversing the syndrome in Kristen. We will know how to manage the beta. Who knows where that could lead? But it all begins with you. You're the clean slate we need to start. Before we go one step further, I want to know what exactly happens with the syndrome, I think. No, but I'd like to hear something that's too bizarre to believe. It literally defies every natural law we've ever known. He couldn't bring himself to put it in words, she thought, but she knew she'd guessed right the first time. The syndrome. Kristen Starr was growing younger. That was the horrible development, and nobody could deal with it, and they couldn't stop it. Carl van de Villiet had created a monstrosity. I am so out of here, she said, struggling to rise from the wheelchair. If you try to keep me here, that's kidnapping. We're talking a capital crime. Alexa, I understand you're upset, but you're in no condition to be discharged. I'm very sorry. He pushed a red button on a radio device on his belt. There was genuine agony in his eyes. I've never in my life coerced a patient in any way, but you have to understand that so much is dependent on you now. There are no easy choices left. He's lost control of the situation here. Ow, she told herself. He's truly terrified of Winston Bartlett. That's who's really got control of my fate. Moments later, the security guard from the lobby, accompanied by Marion, came through the door of the laboratory. No, I'm not going to let you do this, Ally declared. I'm not letting you do any more medical experiments on me. As she struggled again to get out of the wheelchair, she felt a prick in her arm and saw the glint of a needle in the dim light. I'm sorry, Alexa. It should all be over in just a couple of days, and I swear no harm will come to you. She was feeling her consciousness swirl as Marion began rolling her through the steel airlock. The last thing she heard was Van de Villiet saying, "Don't worry. A week from now, all this will seem like a dream." Chapter 31. Friday, April 10, 7:04 a.m. Stone felt his consciousness returning as the blast of an engine cut through his sedative-induced reverie. Where was he? There were vibrations all around him and a deafening roar that was slowly spiraling upward in frequency and volume. As the haze that engulfed his mind slowly began to dissipate, he wondered if this wasn't more of the fantasy he'd been having, of flying through some kind of multicolored space-time continuum. Or was he waking up to something spectacularly real? As he opened his eyes and looked around, he realized it was Nojer. He was in a cramped airline seat, strapped in with a black seat belt. His head was gently secured to a headrest by a soft cotton scarf, but his hands were free, lying in his lap. Somebody had lifted him into the seat and strapped him down. On his left was a plexiglass window, and when he looked out, he saw the earth beneath him begin falling away. My God. Then he realized he was in a white and gray helicopter that had just lifted off from a rooftop helipad. He watched spellbound, quickly coming awake, as the craft quickly began a flight path that circled around and past the lower end of Manhattan. Then he heard the pilot speaking curtly to an air controller somewhere, and he looked up and realized it was the same samurai bastard who'd slugged him on the street and then aided in his kidnapping. But that had to be yesterday, or God knows how many days ago. He was realizing he'd just lost a chunk of his life, and now he was being taken somewhere, in a very big hurry. Being up here always seems like being closer to God, came a voice from behind him. He recognized it with a jolt. It was the man who thought he was God. Shakily, he removed the scarf that had been holding his head and turned around. Winston Bartlett was gazing down through his own plastic window, seemingly talking to himself. What the hell is going on? He could barely get the words out. Oh, Bartlett said, turning to look at him. Good, I particularly wanted you to see this. It should help make my point. Stone struggled to comprehend what was happening. He was with the man he had wanted to call father for nearly 4 decades, whether he could admit that to himself or not. It could be the beginning of the kind of bonding he had always hungered for, but he didn't want it like this. They finally had a relationship, and it was completely antagonistic. He had just been drugged and kidnapped by his own father, this after being threatened and fired. Again, Daddy Dearest. So what was this evolving chapter about? Winston Bartlett, he knew, could be ruthless, but he also was a visionary in his own way. Then he remembered what had happened. He'd been trying to track down Kristen. Where are we going? We're going to the place you seem to find so interesting, Bartlett declared over the din of the engine. But I was hoping that we could have a rational discourse along the way. What's been happening thus far doesn't serve either of us. I'm hoping things have cooled down a bit and we can call a truce. Stone was still trying to clear his head, get the cobwebs away. It was difficult. He'd lost consciousness in a townhouse in the village, on solid ground, and regained it here, where the earth itself seemed in motion. And now Bartlett was trying out another bargaining style, so even the rules appeared to be in flux. Look down. Bartlett was projecting through the din around them and pointing toward the wide expanse of New York Harbor. This McDonnell Douglas is my zendo, my monastery, and the world below is my contemplative garden. I come up here to find peace. This is an intersection of the great forces of nature, one of a finite number on earth, where a mighty river returns to the salt sea from which it came. These waters have flowed in the same cycle for millions, billions of years. Mingling, evaporating, separating again just as life on this planet continually replicates itself, growing and aging and dying, but not before producing the seeds of its replacement. How can something be at once both timeless and constantly changing? I ponder that a lot, and I always end up thinking of this river meeting the sea. Down there, nature is a force unto itself, oblivious to good or evil, to human desires or human laws. Bartlett was doing a riff on some obsession of his own, Stone decided. Or maybe it was some of the Zen philosophy that went along with acquiring a world-class collection of samurai swords, if you believed the published profiles. All the same, looking down at the sprawling city and the harbor full of ships, it was hard not to feel omnipotent and humble at the same time. The thing Bartlett seemed to be getting at, though, was that nature could not be told what to do. And he seemed to be on the verge of declaring himself a part of that unbridled natural force, also powerful enough to do whatever he pleased. Now they were heading up the Hudson, teeming with early bird tourist cruises and small, single-masted sailboats. Bartlett paused to take in the view with satisfaction. Finally, he continued his monologue. I know we've had our differences, but I'm prepared to try to get past that. I want to talk to you about something I always think of when I fly across this river, time. I call my obsession time and the river. Physicists will tell you that time should be thought of as a kind of fourth dimension. Things are always at a certain place in 3 dimensions, but when you describe the location of a subatomic particle, for example, you also have to say when it was there. To locate it accurately, you need 4 dimensions. We think of them all as rigid, but what if one of them could be made fluid? What if you could alter the character of time? In spite of himself, Stone took the bait. I don't know what this has to do with anything. Nobody can alter the pace of time. He found himself recalling a snippet of verse by John Donne. Oh, how feeble is man's power that if good fortune fall, cannot add another hour, nor a lost hour recall. Strictly speaking, that's true, Bartlett said gravely, turning up again to stare out the plexiglass window, down into the morning space below them. The Hudson was now a giant ribbon of blue heading north into the mist. But what if we could alter the clocks in our body to make them run slower? He smiled, then pointed off to his left. All this below us has happened in a couple of 100 years. What will it look like down there in another 100 years? Will we still need these puny machines to fly, or will there be teleportation? Whatever it is, what would you give to be around to see that? To have your own time slow down while the world around you went on? Stone was looking out into space, wondering. Not whether Winston Bartlett was an egomaniacal madman, but rather how truly mad he really was. Flying in the helicopter, he felt like Faust being shown the world by Mephistopheles. Except here, Satan was his own father, offering him a teasing prospect of what it would be like to live. And on, it would make a hell of a story. The problem was, miracles always came with some kind of terrible price. What was the price this time? Then he had another thought. Was that what had happened to Kristen? Was she paying the price for some kind of hubris that pushed nature too far? Nobody had claimed she had any kind of medical condition that necessitated a stem cell intervention. So had she been experimenting with some other procedure? Had Mephistopheles now called in his marker? He wanted to ask, but the vibration and the noise made his brain feel like it was in a blender. Do you understand what I'm saying? Bartlett went on. Do you want to be part of the most exciting development in the history of medicine? Well, this is your chance. There is a majestic experiment underway, but now we know it's not for the faint-hearted. The question is, do you want to live life or just write about it? I think it's time I heard the whole story, Stone said, finally forcing out the words. What's your part in this experiment? I've put everything at risk, but now I'm this close to controlling the clock. So, are you my son, my flesh and blood? Do you have the balls to try it too? Stone suspected the question was rhetorical. He was already up to his neck in whatever was going on. He just didn't yet know how big a part of it he was. While he'd been sedated overnight, had they started experiments on him? He knew that some of the buzz about stem cells involved the fantasy that someday they might be used to forestall the aging process. Responsible researchers all said that they weren't trying to extend life. They were only hoping to make a normal lifetime more livable. Rejuvenative medicine. Winston Bartlett, however, had just taken stem cell potential to its obvious conclusion. He was talking about doing what others did not dare. Regenerative medicine. What would we give to be able to look forward to thousands of mornings like this, ending it all only when we chose? He declared, his hands sweeping over the dense green beneath them. Time would become something that merely flows endlessly through us, ever renewing. So-called old age would cease to exist, at least for those with the courage to take the necessary risks. Now they were moving above the pine forests that comprised the outer ring of the greater New York suburbs, as below them the green wilds of New Jersey, north of the GW Bridge, were sweeping by. Stone pondered if a man somehow stopped growing older and nobody else did. At some point he'd end up being the same age as his grandchildren. That caused him to think again about Amy and wonder if Bartlett would ever reconcile himself to her existence. A few minutes later he looked down and saw a wide clearing in the trees and a red tile roof. They had arrived, but from the air, the Dorian Institute gave no clue to the momentous research going on inside. Bartlett said nothing as they began their descent, and in moments they were settling onto the rooftop landing pad. The downdraft from the road cleared away a few soggy leaves which had somehow blown there, and then the Japanese pilot cut the power and the sound died away. When Bartlett opened the side door, the first thing Stone noticed was the fresh, forest-scented morning air against his face. He found himself wondering whether the roar of the engine had disturbed the patients, but that was almost beside the point. The Dorian Institute was not, he now realized, merely about using stem cell technology to heal the sick. Bartlett had been letting him know that it was also about an experiment that was much, much more profound. In the silence that followed, Bartlett stepped onto the pad and lit a thin, filtered cigar. For somebody who'd just been talking about how long it was possible to live, the act confounded credulity. He took a deep drag, then tossed it onto the paving and peered back through the opening. Are you able to walk yet? I think I can manage. Stones. Ed, he actually wasn't sure at all. The vibrations of the chopper had done serious damage to his sense of equilibrium, but he did find he could take small steps. As they moved to the stairwell leading down to the third-floor elevator, Bartlett said, I know you've been here once before. You tried to sneak in. Grant saw you and sent you packing. Well, this time you're here for real, the full experience. We're going to start by taking you down to the lab and checking you in. The man, Stone suspected, was trying to hide everything that was going on in his mind. He wanted to talk about grandiose themes, but his mind was really somewhere else. Beneath all the braggadocio, there was the smell of deep, abiding fear. Winston Bartlett was in some kind of major denial. You know, life has been good to me, Bartlett declared as though thinking out loud. I've done and seen things most mortals can only dream of. I'm 67, but I feel as though I've only just begun to live, and that's what I intend to happen." He turned back to Stone. "Whether I have a son to share this with remains to be seen." A son? Stone glanced back at the man Bartlett had called Ken, who was now utting down the McDonnell Douglas. Maybe he was a surrogate son for Bartlett. He was clearly a lot more than a bodyguard. He'd been the one who nabbed Kristen and returned her to the reservation. So, what did he think of whatever was going on? Or what about Ally's brother, Grant? He'd claimed he was the son Bartlett longed for and had never had. Winston Bartlett already had a surfeit of sons. When they walked through the door and into the hallway of the third floor, it was milling with the breakfast crowd, nurses, and patients, but no one took any special notice of Winston Bartlett, the man who had made it all possible. Did they even know who he was? Stone wondered. "We're going downstairs." Bartlett directed him toward the elevator. "I'm still offering you a choice. You can be part of the biggest medical advance in human history, or you can be just another impediment." Stone glanced at his watch. The hour was just shy of 9. Where is Ally? What kind of procedure has she undergone? Is she okay? He had to find her. As they headed down, he felt like it was a descent into some pit of no return. Winston Bartlett had not elaborated on what awaited down there. It was as he couldn't bring himself to face whatever it really was. What was the worst-case scenario at this point? What he had to do was figure that out, and then plan a countermove. Chapter 32. Friday, April 10, 7:48 p.m. There are sounds of doors opening and closing with whispered words that are like alien hisses. She senses she is in motion, on a bed that is gliding past powerful overhead lights. She doesn't know where she is, but that doesn't matter, because wherever it was, she knows it surely is a dream. All she remembers is that Carl van de Villiet had told her he wants her to undergo a second procedure with the telomerase enzyme, which possibly might create sufficient antibodies to reverse. It's all a jumble now in her mind. Or had she just dreamed all that? Now her life seems a flowing river that has no beginning and no end. Her mind is drifting, a cork bobbing helplessly in the current. Then her brother Grant drifts alongside her. At least she thinks it's Grant. She recognizes his voice. "Ally, can you hear me?" he seems to be asking. "Is there anything you want to tell me? Do you still want to go through with this?" It's the kind of dream where she can hear things around her, but when she tries to speak, sounds will come. Instead, she's talking inside her head. "I'm afraid. I'm just afraid. I can still try to get you out, but you have to help. I waited for you last night, but you never came." She wants to say, "Yes, get me out, but she can only speak in the dream. Now the lighting changes and she feels like she is falling. No, she realizes, she's just on an elevator. "Talk to me, Ally," whispers the voice one last time. "I can try to stop them, but I have to know what you want." Then a door opens and she floats through it and out. Then comes the clanking of a door that reminds her of the steel airlock she'd gone through last night looking for Kristen. The smells. She's in the laboratory. "We can take her from here," comes a voice, drifting through her reverie. She fantasizes it's Carl van de Villiet. Or maybe he really is there. In her dream state, it's hard to know, but he isn't alone. "You said you'd make one more attempt to create the antibodies. It's Winston Bartlett, or at least it sounds like him. I said I would do all I could, WB. The first attempt. You know what happened. I got almost no results, but I gave you an action of all I managed to garner. Today, I spent the day doing simulations. We're working closer to the edge than I thought. That's why I needed her down at the lab tonight. I want to run some more tests and then try to make a decision. Tonight, there's just a hell of a lot more risk than I first thought." The voice trails off, and Ally finds herself trying to comprehend risk. She hears beta again, and it floats through her mind, but now its meaning is unclear. It's Something she'd heard but can no longer place. "Ally," comes a ghostly voice. Surely this is a dream, and she recognizes it as her father, Arthur. Now she can see him. He's wearing a white cap and they're boating in Central Park. He shows up in her dreams a lot, and she feels he's the messenger of her unconscious, telling her truths that she sometimes doesn't want to hear. "Ally," he says, "he's going to perform the full beta procedure on you. He didn't tell you, but you know. It's true. He thinks he's finally calculated everything right. Can't you see? Is that what you want?" She isn't sure what she wants, and right now she isn't entirely clear where she fits on the scale of sleeping/waking. It is so bizarre. The two parts of her mind, the conscious and the unconscious, are talking to each other. Her unconscious is warning her about fears she didn't even know she had, or at least she hadn't admitted to yet. Then she hears Winston Bartlett's voice again. "Carl, we can't save Kristen now. I've finally realized that. She's gone too far. It's just a tragedy we'll have to figure out how to live with. The body is a complex chemical laboratory that sometimes gets out of balance. There's always hope. I know what I fucking think." Bartlett cuts him off. "I think I'm in line for the syndrome if you don't get this right." What Ally wants to do, more than anything else, is to make sense of what her options are. The most obvious one, in fact, maybe the only one, is to flow along with that infinite river she feels around her. Just to lie where she is, in this sedative-induced reverie, and let her body be taken over by Carl van de Villiers. Perhaps he has marvelous things in store for her, except she has no idea what's real and what is imaginary. The simulations are giving me some idea of what went wrong with the beta before. The voice is Van de Villiers. "I have one more test to run, but if I handled this the way the simulation now suggests, I think I could actually generate the telomerase antibodies we need and get the beta to finally work, avoiding the syndrome. But to prove it would require a full-scale experiment. I'm reluctant to do that without Alexa's permission. Christ, Carl, are you getting cold feet? This is a hell of a time for that. Call it a pang of rationality. But everything is at stake. I don't know what's eventually going to happen with the syndrome, but it's criminal to jeopardize any more lives." Van de Villiers sighs. "Look, you had the procedure of your own free will and you knew the risks. Alexa Hampton didn't volunteer for a beta. She's not a lab rat. At the very least, we ought to get her to sign a release. The liability is. In any case, I'm not doing anything till I run this last test. Then maybe I'll have some idea exactly how much risk is involved. And then, by God, we're going to do it. Tonight. This is it." She feels a cold metal object insinuate itself against her chest. Time rushes around her, sending her forward on a journey that seems increasingly inevitable. Where it's taking her, she has no idea, but she senses she no longer has an option of whether she wants to go or not. Now her dreamscape has become crowded as Grant drifts in once more. He seems to be wearing a white lab coat, like the others. He settles beside her and takes her hand. "Ally, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be here for you." "Grant, why are you here? Do you really give a damn about me?" She wants to talk to him, but the words aren't working. Is this happening? Don't let them give you more medications, she tells herself. Get your mind back and get out of here. Chapter 33. Friday, April 10, 8:45 p.m. Ellen O'Hara had not left after the day shift ended at 6 p.m. Instead, she had told Dr. Van de Villiers that she wanted to reorganize some of the NIH paper files she kept in her office on the first floor. The truth was, she had become convinced that the culmination of something deeply evil was scheduled for later that night. The evil had begun when Kristen Starr's mother arrived looking for her and declaring that she'd been kidnapped. Then, after Dr. V categorically denied he knew anything about her, a blatant lie, Kristen was brought back to the Institute from wherever she'd been moved to, and she was visibly changed. She was whisked down to the sub-basement the moment she arrived and immediately sealed off in intensive care. But it was clear she had no idea who she was or where she was. Something horrible had happened to her. And maybe it was imagination, but she no longer even looked like a grown woman. Then this morning, Bartlett and his Japanese bodyguard brought in the young man, and who had accompanied Alexa Hampton, but he wasn't put through the admissions formalities. Instead, he was taken directly downstairs. May at the front desk said she thought he was a newspaper reporter she'd met once when they were on a public health panel together. That was when Ellen realized he was Stone Ames, that feisty medical columnist for the New York Sentinel. Now Stone Ames might be able to save Alexa Hampton. Dr. Van de Vliet and Deborah had carried out a special stem cell procedure for her aortic stenosis, the first that they had attempted for that particular condition. The results, as shown by her file, were nothing short of astonishing. She'd begun responding in a matter of hours. She should be in a room upstairs, so why was she still down in the sub-basement? Now, Ellen O'Hara knew the reason. She had seen in the file that they were going to perform the beta procedure on Alexa Hampton. When they'd performed it on Kristen's the result was a horrific side effect, and now they were going to do it again. Tonight, the criminality that started with Kristen Starr and Catherine Starr was going to be compounded. She was about to become part of a criminal conspiracy. She had to put a stop to it. She was nervous about confronting Van de Vliet, but she didn't know what she could say that wouldn't sound like an indictment. Still, she was damned well determined to do it. If nothing else, it would provide a diversion. She put away the files and walked out into the dim hallway, then made her way into the reception area. "Everything all right, Grace?" she asked the nurse at the desk. "You're working late," came the pleasant reply. "Quiet as a mouse around here. I guess it'll be even quieter when the clinical trials are finished. I mean, after the celebrating is over." Right. But they're not over, Ellen thought, and there may not be a celebration. "I'm going down to Sublay." "Full one. Is Dr. V down there now?" "I think he's in his office. Everybody else went out for a bite, probably that diner down the road. I think something's scheduled for later on. I don't know. Everybody looks kind of worried." Nobody has said anything to me." "They don't need to," she thought. "I saw the file." She swiped her card through the security slot and got onto the elevator. When she stepped off, the laboratory was dark and a light was showing under Dr. Van de Vliet's office door. Good. She swiped her card in the reader next to the laboratory airlock and went in. Another swipe, and she was on the elevator down to the sub-basement, where she was not authorized to be. She went to the second door and slipped her card through the slot, wondering what she would see. The room was dark and smelled of alcohol and disinfectant. She quickly closed the door behind her before turning on the overhead fluorescence. Alexa Hampton, secured to the bed with restraints, and she appeared to be sedated, though she did slowly open her eyes as the light flickered and then stabilized. There was a wheelchair in the corner. "Miss Hampton, can you hear me?" she whispered, hoping not to alarm her. "Do you remember me? I was the one who helped you when you were first admitted." She watched as Alexa stared at her for a moment and then quietly nodded. I want to get out of here." Her eyelids fluttered and then she closed her eyes again. "But I'm too weak. I can't move." "You're strapped down, love. Let me help you." She reached for the Velcro straps and then paused. Was this a decision she wanted to make? If I do this, it's the end of my career here? Have I lost my mind? What will I do after this? But if I don't try to stop them, God knows what. We could all end up convicted of criminal conspiracy and in prison. That reporter friend of yours is here. She pulled open the straps, then helped Alexa sit up in the bed and swing her legs around. "I'm going to take you to him." "It's so horrible," Ally went on. She was settling into the wheelchair as though she expected it. Then she looked up, her eyes dazed. "Where are you taking me, reporter? Do you mean, like I said, I'm moving you into your friend's room?" She rolled her to the door, then stopped and cracked it and peeked out. "Don't say a word, dear," she whispered as she began pushing Alex. Down the hall. There was a pale, flickering light under the door at the end. Deborah and David and the others have all gone out to the diner down the road, and Dr. V is in his office, probably running some last-minute computer simulations. But we need to be quiet. The fluorescent lights seem to swirl overhead. This all feels so familiar, Ally thought. This is where I saw Kristen. Does Ellen know what happened to her? You two have to decide what you want to do. Stone, you're sure he's here? Yes, she said, and he's in some kind of battle of wills with Mr. Bartlett. When they reached the door at the end, she tried it, and it was locked. She pulled out her magnetic card and zipped it through the slot. As they went through, Ally realized the room was lit only by the glow of a laptop computer screen. Stay here, Ellen said, turning to leave. I'm going to try to talk to Dr. V. As the door closed, Stone finally looked up. He was wearing a sweater and jeans and had been typing furiously on a Xerox laptop. Hey, how are you feeling? He paused to glance down and save what he'd been writing, then clicked off the computer. I have no idea. Something about him didn't seem quite right. It was like he was on happy pills or something. How about you? The last time I saw you, I was passing out. I don't actually remember all that much of what happened after that. I think I went back to the city, but I feel great. Ow, like I went through a dark tunnel and came out the other side. I feel very different. I don't know what's next, but right now I'm just happy to be in the middle of the biggest story in the history of medical science. What's going on with him, she wondered. He's spacey. He has to be on some kind of drug. What have they done to him? He closed the laptop, then reached and clicked on a light by the bed. Come on, want to see something incredible? It's a marvel of medical science. It's never before happened. What? Come with me. I guarantee you've never seen anything like it. He tossed the laptop onto the bed, then swung his feet around and settled them onto the floor. She noticed that the room was a pale blue with linoleum. There was a pair of white slippers next to the bed. He slipped them on and then opened the door and grabbed her wheelchair. The hallway felt colder now, yet it was also stifling, as though someone had drawn the air out of it. There's nothing we can do, Stone said. There was a hint of madness in his voice. It was as if he were trying to convince himself that he was still sane, and it wasn't working. He was just barely holding it together. Then she realized he was about to go into intensive care where Kristen had been. So Kristen's still here. Oh, you'd better believe it, he said. She is most definitely still here. When they got to the door, he revolved back. Ally, you really don't have to see this, you. No, not if you'd rather. Nothing remotely like this is going to happen to you. They assured me. What the hell is he talking about? On the other hand, he went on, maybe you should see it. Maybe everybody in the world should see it. It's astonishing. He pushed open the door and rolled her in. Then he reached down and lifted her to her feet. Standing wasn't that hard, and somehow he had known that. The room seemed to be captured in mist, though surely that was her imagination. Everything must be her imagination. Kristen was in the corner of the room in a wheelchair, but now her body was shriveled. No, shriveled was not the right word. In fact, there might not be a word to describe the change. Her skin was smooth and flawless. She didn't look like this the last time Ally saw her, and now she wondered how long ago that actually was. How many hours or days? The bones were the same as always. In her cheeks, the underlying structure was sharp and severe and elegant, but there wasn't enough flesh on them. They were reminiscent of what happens at puberty, when the body starts changing in ways that aren't well coordinated. That was it. Kristen had become a child it was in. Her innocent eyes, except that her body was now the flesh of a child over the bone structure of an adult. It scarcely seemed like the same person from the last time. She had crossed some mystical divide. She was holding a large rag doll. Where did she get that? Ally wondered, and humming the tune of the ditty that ended with, Now I know my abs. Tell me what you think of me. She can't talk, Stone was saying. I mean, actually communicate, or at least she doesn't seem to. Want to? I've already tried, but isn't what's happened incredible? There's never been anything like this in history. The replacement cells are making her body newer and newer, so she's getting younger and younger. Ally walked over slowly and tried to take her hand. She was grasping the doll, and she violently pulled back. Hey, she said, trying to muster a matter-of-fact air. How's it going? Do you remember me? I don't think she recognizes you, Stone said in a stage whisper. I wish I knew more about the biology of the brain, but I think there's some kind of aggressive replacement of memory synapses underway. I think it's one of those LIFO things. last in slash first out. She's regressing chronologically, but in reverse. Maybe she's lost use of language the way Alzheimer's patients do. I don't know. Ally felt herself near to tears. Vanda V. Lyot was going to use antibodies for me to try to. Something. That was always a long shot, he said. But now the preliminary tests he's just done on you indicate that the level of enzyme in you can be controlled very accurately. He's very excited. She turned back to him. How do you know all? I've become part of the story, Ally. That's not supposed to happen. But this is the only way to get it all firsthand. I have to live it. And guess what? I now know enough to write the book I've been waiting all my life to write. I have the punchline, which is, stem cell technology goes to the very origin of life, and it may turn out that for once Mother Nature can be fooled. Dr. V's venturing into areas now where even he doesn't know what's going on. Ally. What's happening in this room is the biggest medical story since. Nothing begins to compare. Stone had lost it. There was true madness about him now. She walked back over to Kristen and leaned over and kissed her. Kristen stared at her in unfocused confusion, but then she smiled. I'm alone in here. Will you take me outside? I want to find my mother. The voice was that of a 5-year-old, and it sent a chill through Alexa. The grown-up memory cells in her brain had been replaced by blanks. It was last in slash first out, and 30-plus years of life experience were being replaced with brand-new nothingness. The syndrome. Time had to move in one direction or the other. The body either went forward or in reverse. There was no equilibrium. Then she had a further thought. Winston Bartlett was not going to let this beta disaster run to its natural conclusion, a horrifying exposure to the world. He was going to intervene. Kristen was about to leave this room in her current condition. Either she left cured, which seemed wholly implausible at this point, or she departed in a manner that left no trace. Then yet another thought crossed her befuddled mind. She and Stone knew about Kristen. What does that mean for us? Stone, we can't leave her here. What are you proposing we do? He queried. Take her to an ER somewhere. Frankly, I don't know how you would describe her problem to an emergency room. Admissions staffer. I'll think of something. By the way, Ally, so you should know she's wearing diapers. This is the real deal. And how do you figure in all this? I told you. I'm going to be the James Boswell of stem cell technology. I'm going to report on this miracle from the inside. But now, Ally, if the beta procedure is going to succeed, you have to be the one to make it happen. She looked at him, still stunned by the wildness in his eyes, and she had a feeling like a heart was being wrenched out. You're working with them, aren't you? She was fuming with anger. She no longer knew who could be trusted. He'd taken leave of his senses, or had his senses been taken from him? Which was it? I'm thinking out you, and hopefully about us. You're being offered something you'd be a fool to turn down, that's all I have to say. He took her hand and helped her back into the wheelchair. Then he whispered, let's get out of here. He quickly opened the door and rolled her out into the empty hall. When he closed the door behind them, he whispered again. Didn't you see the surveillance camera and microphone in there? There's one in the room where they had me locked up. They just put them in. To watch Kristen and me. I heard Bartlett and Vanda V. Lyot talking. If any of this beta screw-up with her gets out of this building, Bartlett's conglomerate is toast. He bent over near to her and continued whispering. Listen, we don't have much time. They've got your procedure scheduled for later on tonight. I'm still somewhat of a zombie from something they gave me, but maybe I can help get you out of here. Let me tell you what I've found out so far. Vanda V. Lyot gave you a low-dosage version of the beta procedure, in hopes he could harvest telomerase antibodies and use them on Bartlett. But there was only a trace. He did inject those into Bartlett, but he doesn't think it's enough to have any effect. So now, Bartlett is demanding he give you a massive dose of telomerase. Vanda V. Lyot is freaked about the risks, but Bartlett thinks it's his only chance to head off having what happened to Kristen happen to him too. However, What Bartlett doesn't know is that Van de Vliet has just finished a new computer simulation, and he thinks he's finally figured out how to do a successful beta procedure. For him, that's the holy grail. Ooh, you know all this? I heard him talking to his assistant Deborah. I was supposed to be sedated. The reason he wants to perform it on you is because he now has so much data on you as a result of the first procedure. He thinks he's got a real shot at redemption. Ally, if he's calculated wrong, you could end up like Kristen. What about you? She asked. You should get out too. I should, but look, I've been trying to get in here for a long time. Now I'm finally in. You could say I'm under duress, but I'm here and this is where it's happening. If I get out alive, I have a hell of a story. Is he thinking clearly? She wondered. He seems to be drifting in and out of a mental cloud. What is wrong with him? Stone, there's an emergency door on the first level of the basement. If we can get up there, we might be able to escape. And while we're doing it, you might want to seriously reconsider staying in this place. We've both seen Kristen. What? Makes you think they're planning on either of us ever living to tell that tale? I'm having some trouble thinking just now. He was helping her out of the wheelchair. But I do know you've got to disappear. Whatever plans they have for me remain and to be seen, but I know exactly what's in store for you. So come on and try to walk. We can't use the elevator, but there's a fire door at the other end of the hall, which leads up to the lab floor. It's probably alarmed, she thought. Then what do we do? Walking was easier than she'd expected. The strength was rapidly coming back in her legs, but more than that, there was no sense of tightness in her chest as she might have expected. She was always aware of traces of gnosis, but now she felt nothing. Maybe there were miracles. The hallway was dimly lit, and she wondered, is a surveillance camera tracking our every move? Shit, Stone announced when they reached the fire door. It's alarmed. That's exactly what I was afraid of, she thought. Any chance they're bluffing? Don't think so, he pointed. That little red diode says it's hot. God, she thought, we've got to get out of here. Maybe we could just make a dash for it. He looked at her and shook his head. Like you're in shape to dash? No, what's called for is stealth. He was pulling out his wallet. The thing about these card readers, some of them, like those that get you into bank atoms, sometimes will open for other cards. I've got 4 kinds of plastic. Might as well give them a try. Well, just hurry. She leaned against the wall. I'm starting to get weak. He slipped his Visa through and nothing happened. He immediately tried MasterCard. Again, nothing. Maybe I should try my all-purpose bank card. He slipped a Chase plastic through, but once more nothing happened. This isn't working, Stone, she sighed, feeling her legs weaken as she clasped the wall. I think we're going to have to chance the elevator. Don't give up yet. He took out his American Express, kissed it, and swiped it through. One last shot. The red diode blinked off. Never leave home without it, she whispered. We will now proceed very, very quietly. He carefully pushed open the door, inches at a time. The stair had metal steps and was lit by a single fluorescent bulb. As he helped her up, Ally was wondering if there was any way to extract her mother too. She couldn't imagine how she could do it, and besides, Nina might well refuse to go. No, just get out and make Stone understand that no way was Winston Bartlett going to let him go free to tell the story of Kristen. He clearly wasn't thinking with all cylinders. Stone, Ims was about to disappear, just like Kristen had. The entry to the laboratory level was also alarmed, but American Express once again saved the day. When they pushed open the door, however, the lights were on in the office at the far end of the hallway. Where's that door that Grant was going to use to get me out? She wondered. Then she saw a door marked exit next to Van de Vliet's office. Shit, it's all the way at the opposite end of the hall. Stone, we have to get that door before anybody sees us. I don't know if it's alarmed or not, but that's the ball game. She reached for his hand. If we can get there and get out, please come with me. We can make it to the highway. You can't stay here. Let's get you out, then we'll talk. I'll drag you if I have to. As they moved quietly along the wall, they could hear an argument underway. She recognized the voices as Ellen Hara's and Carl Van de Vliet's. I won't allow my stat to be part of this, Ellen was declaring. I've seen Kristen. Any form of the beta is dangerous. If you do anything involving that procedure again, you'll put everybody here at risk. Don't you think I've thought about that, agonized? About it. We have one chance to turn all this around. This is it. I don't want to be involved, and I don't want any of my people involved, do you hear me? Then keep them upstairs. He was striding out of his office, flipping. It's in the hallway. Oh shit, Ally whispered. She opened a door and pulled Stone into the examining room where her mother had first been admitted. Just as she did, she heard the ding of the elevator and caught a glimpse of Deborah and David De Vilayet senior researchers getting off. She closed the door. The room should have been pitch black, but it wasn't. A candle was burning on a counter, and there was a figure at the far end of the room. He was sitting on the examining table. In the lotus position, his eyes closed. Are you ready? Kenji Noda asked. I think just about everyone is here now. Oh my God, Ally thought. What are we going to do? She watched helplessly as he reached over and touched a button. The desk. A red light popped on above the door. A moment later it opened. What are you doing here? Deborah asked, staring at them. Getting some exercise, Stone said. Then Winston Bartlett appeared in the doorway behind her. How did they get up here? Ally, I'm not going to let them do this to you, Stone declared, seizing her hand. We're going to, Ken, please get him out of here, Bartlett said. Take him back downstairs, anywhere. You shouldn't be out of your wheelchair. Deborah was saying. She turned to Ellen. Would you get? I'm not getting you anything, Ellen O'Hara declared. I've just submitted my resignation, effective 3 minutes ago. I don't know a thing about what's going on here, and from now on, I don't want to know. She got on the elevator and the door closed. Ken, Bartlett said, first things first, go after that woman. Don't let her leave the building. Now Deborah was rolling in a wheelchair. David had appeared also, disquiet in his eyes, and he helped her in. There's very little risk to this, he said. Believe me. She felt him giving her an injection in her left arm. No, don't. As the room started to spin, she reached out and grabbed Stone's arm and pulled him down to her. Downstairs, she whispered. Look around. There she didn't get to finish because Deborah was whisking her out the door and toward the laboratory. Stone had just grinned confusedly, seemingly not paying any attention to what she was saying. Instead, he ambled toward the open stair door and disappeared. At this point, however, no one appeared to notice or to care. They were rolling her through the steel airlock. On the other side, Winston Bartlett was already waiting, standing next to a gurney with straps. No. Chapter 34. Friday, April 10, 9:34 p.m. She was still conscious as David and Deborah lifted her onto the gurney. There was no operating table in the laboratory, but this procedure did not require one. It consisted of a series of small subcutaneous injections along both sides of the spine, followed by a larger injection at the base of the skull. As the injections began, she drifted into a mindset where she was never entirely sure how much was real, how much was fantasy, how much deliberate, how much accidental. She remembered that she felt her grasp of reality slipping away, but there was no sense of pain. Instead, images and sensations in a sequence that corresponded to the passage of time drifted through her mind. It was couched in terms of the people she knew. The first image was her mother, Nina, and they were together, struggling through a dense forest initially. She thought they were looking for her father's grave, but then it became clear they were searching for some kind of magic potion that would save her mother's life. As they clawed their way through tangled tendrils and dark arbors, she became increasingly convinced their quest was doomed, that she was destined to watch Nina pass into oblivion. But then something happened. The forest opened out onto a vast meadow bathed in sunshine. In the center was a cluster of snow-white mushrooms, and she knew instinctively that these would bring eternal life to anyone who ate them. Come, she said to Nina, these can save you. Ally, I'm too old now. I don't want to be saved. There comes a moment in your life when you've done everything you feel you needed to do. You've had the good times, and now all that's left is the slow deterioration of what's left of your body. It robs the joy out of living. No, Mom, this is different, she said, plucking one of the white mushrooms and holding it out. This prevents you from growing any older. You'll stay just the way you are. You can have a miracle. To never escape this veil of tears, to watch everyone you love grow old and wither and die. Is that the miracle you want me to have? Then she looked up at the flawless blue sky and held out her arms as though to embrace the sun. My mind ally. You've given me back my mind. Now I can live out whatever more life God will see fit to give me and actually know who I am and where I am. That's miracle enough for me. As she said it, a beam of white light came directly from the sun and enveloped her. Then the meadow around them faded away, and all she could see was Carl van de Vliet, who was bending over her and lifting back her eyelids. Alexa, I can't tell you what you're about to feel, because no one has ever been where you're about to be. God help us, We're on the high wire without a net here, but any new cell configurations should immediately form tissue that's a facsimile of what's already there. That's what the simulations show. She was listening to him, not sure if he was real or a dream. Then she heard Bartlett's voice. Why are you talking to her, Carl? She can't hear you. We don't actually know whether she can or not. At some level, I think she's aware of her surroundings. In a way, we should hope that she is. If there are going to be impacts on her consciousness, I'd rather she be alert and able to remember what it was like. Then the voices drifted away, but she was sure she had no control over anything. The white mushrooms. She was thinking about them again. Only now they were above her and growing toward the sky, and then she realized she was underground, buried and looking up from her own grave. What happened next was a journey through time somewhere in the far distant future. She seemed to be watching it through a large window, unable to interact with what was happening on the other side, time. She felt a sensation at the back of her neck and the images faded away. This damned well better be right, came a voice. There's not going to be another chance. I did an activity simulation for a range of antibodies, just to make sure she wouldn't automatically reject the enzyme because of the earlier injection. The voice belonged to Carl van de Vliet. Her mind was clearing, and she recognized it, but all the results indicate that the effect of the antibodies is essentially washed out at this concentration of active enzyme. Have the good grace to let me try to get this right. She was listening and trying to understand what was going on. Her mind had been drifting through time and space, but now she was aware that something new was happening. The hallucinations, the conversations around her, all were beginning to focus in, to build in intensity. But that was not what was really happening. It was merely a mask over something that had entered the laboratory, some kind of force. Then her vision began to work in a strange way that felt more like a sixth sense. She was seeing what was going on in the room, even though her eyes were shut. Or perhaps they weren't. She didn't know, and she was still strapped to the gurney, so she had no way to check. Christy, Winston Bartlett said, dismay in his voice, you shouldn't be in here. You should be resting. What the hell are you doing down here? Van de Vliet demanded. The pitch of his voice had noticeably gone up. Who, Ally wondered, who's he talking to? There are definitely new people in the room. Come on, Ally said. A voice in her ear, urgent. This time she knew who it was. It was Stone. Damn them all. I'm getting you out of here, now. Chapter 35. Friday, April 10:07 p.m. She felt the straps on the gurney loosening, and then she started prying. Her eyes open. She thought, hoped, it was Stone, but she couldn't see well enough to be absolutely sure. Her mind and her vision were still overflowing with horrifying nightmares of time gone awry. What did all those bizarre dreams mean? She was groggy but was coming alert. Perhaps it was the sense of electricity in the room, but something very unscheduled was going on. When she finally got her eyes open and focused, what greeted her was a blinding row of white lights directly overhead that seemed to isolate her. But there was tumult all around her in the lab, a cacophony of alarmed voices echoing off the hard surfaces of glass and steel. She squinted into the light as she felt Stone slip his arm around and her shoulders and raise her up. Thank God he's here, she thought. Come on, he was saying. She's not interested in you, she just wants Kristen out of here. This is the only way. Who? She was startled by the sound of her own voice, mildly surprised to discover she was even capable of speech. She gazed around, trying to find her when. Jesus. Catherine Starr was standing next to Kristen. She was moving in a surreal way, gripping Kristen's hand and pulling her along. Stone had found her. He had understood. Catherine Starr appeared to be wearing a blue bathrobe under a gray mackintosh, but the part that got Ally's attention was the knife she was holding, glistening like a scalpel. No, it was a scalpel, shiny and sharp as a razor. Tough luck, guys. No pistol this time, but she still managed to come up with a convincing substitute. She didn't look any saner than she did the last time. Now, though, she finally had what she'd come. Or she had her daughter. Could it be that Kristen was about to be liberated? Had the world come full circle? No. The voice belonged to Winston Bartlett. I want her with me. You're the prick responsible for this. Catherine whirled on it, brandishing the scalpel. Mrs. Starr, Van de Vliet interjected, eyeing the sharp metal. You can't take Kristen away now. She's at a very delicate stage of her procedure. I seem to be doing a lot of things I can't, she declared. Turning back. I'm not supposed to be out of my room, but I am. And now I'm getting us both out of here. We're going through that airlock and onto the elevator. So whose throat do I need to cut to do it? Winston Bartlett was edgy. Away, and his eyes betrayed he was more concerned than he wished to appear. Look at her. Catherine Starr continued shoving Kristen, who was completely disoriented, her eyes blinking in confusion in front of Van de Vliet. She doesn't know me, she doesn't know anything. She's acting like a baby. What in hell have you done to her? She had the procedure she wanted. At the time I warned there might be side effects we couldn't anticipate. She's lost her mind, that's what you call a side effect? All this time Kristen was just standing and staring blankly into space, but there were growing storm clouds welling in her eyes. It caused Ally to wonder what was really going on with her. Had this troubled girl been me? Aid permanently childlike, or was there a split personality at work? Did she have a new mind now, or a parallel mind? We're still trying to stabilize her condition, Van de Vliet said in a soothing tone. We just need a little more time. That was when Kristen wrenched free of her mother's grasp. Her eyes had just gone critical, traveling into pure madness. She strode over and seized a glass jar containing a clear solvent. I want them all to die, she said, in a little girl's voice. They're going to kill me if I don't kill them first. Now Catherine Starr had turned and was staring at her. Christy, honey, put the bottle down. I'm going to take you home. I don't know what he's done to you, but I'm not going to let you stay here anymore. You're coming with me. This is not going to end well, Ally thought. She began struggling to her feet, trying to clear her mind enough for an exit strategy. Nina was upstairs, or at least that was where she had been. Okay, the first order of business is to get her out. Stone could probably manage on his own. Now Kristen was walking over to an electric heater positioned on a lab workbench. She switched it on and the tunks and elements immediately began to glow. Then, still holding the bottle, she turned back to Van de Vliet. I see things that I never saw before. My mind has powers it never had till now. He nodded knowingly. I always suspected that. I'm able to think just like I did when I was little, she continued, cutting him off. Sometimes I'm there in that world, then sometimes I flip back, but I can always tell when grown-ups are lying to me. What did you do to my mind, Kristen? Van de Vliet said, the brain has many functions that we still only barely understand. With the beta procedure, we don't really know what activates general cell replacement, or what the nature of the replacement tissue actually is. We're just at the beginning of a marvelous, I'm seeing a future in which nothing exists, she muttered despairingly, still holding the glass bottle of solvent. I don't want to be a part of it. Van de Vliet was staring at her, his eyes flooded with alarm. What? What are you seeing, Kristen? I'm seeing you dead. She glared around all of you. Then, with an animal scream, she whirled and flung the glass liter bottle at the electric heater on the laboratory workbench. It crashed into the shiny steel case with a splintering sound, followed by an explosion that sent a ball of fire and a shock wave through the room. In an instant, the entire end of the lab was engulfed in a sea of flame. Ally sensed herself being knocked to the floor, but she also felt a surge of adrenaline. This was in-game, the moment when everybody found out who they were. A hand was gripping her like a vise. It was Stone's, but the blast had knocked him to the floor too, and he was now motionless, slumped against the side of a laboratory bench. It was like she was being held in a death grip. Was she going to have to carry him out? She wasn't even sure she had the strength in her legs to get herself out. Now something even more horrible was slowly beginning to happen. The central part of the lab had several sets of steel shelving arranged in rows, and each supported a carefully organized arrangement of sample vials filled with some kind of organic solvent. She saw with horror that the first towering set of shelves, easily 7 feet high, was slowly tipping from the force of the blast. It teetered for an instant, and then fell into the set of shelves next to it with the ponderous majesty of a giant sequoia. What happened next sounded like the end of the world. As the first set of shelves crashed against the second, like a row of massive steel and glass dominoes, each subsequent tower tipped and fell against the next, and on all the while, as the tumbling racks were spewing flammable solvents across the smoky lab space. They were ripping out electrical wiring and sending sparks flying. The whole danger dynamic of the room had been turned upside down. Catherine, Starr, and Deborah and David now lay pinned beneath a tangled mass of angle iron supports that had collapsed in the wake of the falling shelves. All three appeared to be unconscious. Winston Bartlett was at the far end of the room. He'd been slammed against the wall by the force of the explosion, but was pulling himself up. He seemed to be unhurt, though it was hard to see through the billowing smoke. Carl van de Villiet was standing in the middle of the laboratory. His eyes glazed, flames and smoke swirling about him. What does this mean to him? Ally wondered. Years of research data being obliterated in an instant, but the horror wasn't over. The fire was depleting the hermetically sealed room's oxygen. Ally sensed that anybody who didn't get out of the lab in the next 5 minutes wasn't going to be going anywhere standing up. But what was happening with Kristen? She was walking through the flames as though on a country stroll. It was like the fires of hell were all around her, and she was ambling through them unscathed. She must be experiencing third-degree burns, Ally thought, yet there's a sense that nothing can harm her. How could it be? And then an astonishing possibility began to dawn on her. With the stem cell enzymes working at full blast, was it possible her body was immediately replacing its damaged cells? Could it be that the telomerase enzyme didn't know the difference between a cell that had aged and that had been damaged by its environment? Jesus, Stone said, finally stirring. At that moment the overhead lights flickered and died, and the emergency lights clicked on, sending battery-powered beams through the smoke. Christ, Ally, he declared, gazing around still dazed as his consciousness seemed to be slowly returning. We've got to get people out of here. There didn't appear to be a sprinkler system. Probably, she thought, because an onslaught of water would wipe out all the computers. Now she was thinking about the automatic airlocks. How did those steel and glass doors work without electricity? Did they have a battery backup, or some kind of fail-safe mechanism, which provided a manual override in case of a power outage? Now Winston Bartlett was striding toward the center of the room. From the dazed look in his eyes, it wasn't clear whether he knew where he was or not. Kristen was walking toward him on a collision course. You let this happen, she said. You wanted to ruin my life. Christy, nobody made you do anything, he said, choking from the smoke. But now we've got to, it's too late, she declared, lashing out with the side of her hand against his neck. He staggered back, flailing, and seized an iron girder. There was a blast of voltage, a shower of sparks, and he screamed as he crumpled sideways. Then the force of his fall broke his hand loose from the electrical short. He lay prostrate on the smoky floor of the lab, twitching. My God, Ally thought, she really is determined to kill us all before she's through. Kristen, Vanda V. Lyot was saying. Please, there's still time. I'm going to do everything I can for you. He was gasping for air, and now more vials of flammable liquid were exploding from the heat and igniting. He turned and stumbled toward the airlock. There were sounds of yelling on the other side. The people outside can't get through, Ally realized. This security lock has no override. We're going to die. Vanda V. Lyot pounded on the button controls of the airlock, but there was no response. Smoke was billowing around him, and he choked, coughing and dropping to one knee. Then Kristen walked up behind him. She appeared not to notice the flames and smoke swirling around her. This is where you get what's coming, you bastard. I warned you you'd better do something for me, but you never really intended to help me. I was just an experiment. That's all I ever was, for both of you. You fuckers. And she lashed out with a powerful fist, sending him to the floor. Outside there was now the wail of a siren, the sound faintly filtering through. And the pounding on the other side of the airlock continued, though now it had the force of authority. At last, Ally thought, somebody finally got serious and called the fire department. Now, Kristen had bent over the prostrate Vanda V. Lyot and was doing something, though Ally couldn't tell what. Keep your face close to the floor, Stone was yelling. It's where the last of the air is. Hang on, we'll be okay. She had a premonition they were not going to be okay. They all were going to suffocate. All that. Us, except Kristen. She seemed to possess some magic immunity from the horrors around her. She had risen and was standing over Vanda V. Lyot like a statue, while everybody else was on the floor. As Ally watched her, a serene figure in the middle of chaos and death, she began to have an odd sensation. The burning in her lungs from the smoke started to dissipate, and strength felt like it was pouring into her limbs. The tongues of flame around her had become dancing white figures that invited her to rise and join them. She did slowly, not quite knowing what she was doing. Then she walked to the jammed airlock. She stepped over Carl Vanda V. Lyot's collapsed frame and placed her hands on the steel. It was already scalding, but she only took fleeting notice of that. While a firefighter's axe futilely pounded on the outside, she seized the wide bar of the door and ripped it open, to the sound of wrenching metal. It was a superhuman effort she didn't realize she was capable of, and it was the last thing she remembered. The space around her had become a blazing white cloud, and she didn't feel the hands of the two firefighters who seized her as she fell through the open airlock. Epilogue, Thursday, June 25, 10:49 p.m. You're really something, Stone declared, falling back onto the rumpled sheets. What's come over you lately? Don't you ever get tired? Maybe I'm just happy to be alive, Alla. He said, smiling as she ran a finger down his chest. I'm catching up on all the living I've been missing out on. Her heart was definitely on the mend in several ways. She was beginning to think she was in love. After Steve went missing, she thought that love would never happen again, but maybe it had. Know what? He said, rising up. I've really worked up an appetite. How about you? Think I'll make an omelet. Got any eggs left in the fridge? Should be some, she said. But I'll pass. Anything I eat after 10 goes straight to places on my body that don't need further reinforcement. It was so nice just to have someone to be near again. Her nervous system was still recovering from the harrowing experience down on the ear. In fact, she wasn't really sure what actually had happened. The crashed McDonnell Douglas was retrieved from the water the next day, but there were no bodies aboard. Had Winston Bartlett drowned and his body been swept out to sea by the tide? Also, there must have been a third person, a pilot. And what about Kenji Noda, who also was missing? Did he make it to shore? In any case, they all had disappeared. The case was closed, and since nobody had found a will, New York State was currently the executor of his fortune. Eileen Bartlett was sole heir. Her waiting game had paid off superbly. The price of her Jerex shares was doubling every 2 weeks. She was about to become a very rich woman. And indeed, but had Winston Bartlett really gone to a watery grave? Ally somehow doubted it. He had too much invested in life to cash in so easily. As she watched Stone get up and swat himself in a huge white towel before Hetty. For the kitchen, she found herself replaying that harrowing scene at the pier. She kept trying to remember something Bartlett had said about forming some kind of society. Was she fantasizing, or had he said he was going to do that, and offer the beta procedure to its members? What was he going to call it? Try as she might, she couldn't remember. She had developed a mental block that her mind was using to shield her psyche from the horror of that evening. That night she'd first considered going to St. Vincent's Hospital emergency room for the gunshot wound. But then she'd thought it over and decided there were too many things to explain that couldn't be explained. Instead, she just went home and washed the wound and filled it up with neosporin. She didn't even tell Nina. The next morning, scar tissue was already forming. Now it was completely healed, and even the scar had all but disappeared. Had the beta really worked? She wanted to tell Stone about that possibility, but she wasn't sure how he would take it. And she absolutely did not want to end up in the book. She pulled on a terry cloth robe and slippers and padded her way into the kitchen. She wasn't hungry, but she felt like a glass of wine. She poked around in the wine rack in the kitchen closet and came up with a bottle of Bordeaux. Stone was cracking large white eggs into a stoneware bowl. "Sure I can't make some for you?" he asked, leaning over to buss her hair as she searched in the drawer for a corkscrew. "I'm gonna throw in some cheddar, but I'll leave it out if that doesn't work for you." "I just want a glass of red wine," she said, retrieving the corkscrew. "And I need a memor." Jogging. What's a word that makes you think of living a long time? I want to look up something on the internet and I don't know how to start. "What kind of word is it?" he queried. "I'm a wordsmith. 20 questions, is it? A noun, a verb, an adjective? If I could remember that, I might be able to come up with it." He was tossing a quarter stick of butter into the pan. "Hey, I once learned hypnosis. Why don't you let me take you under?" "Does that really work?" "It's how I come up with interview stuff sometimes, from years ago. We really do have a complicated memory system. I think everything you ever knew is buried somewhere, maybe in a tiny little wrinkle." She suspected he might be right. In this case, the repressed info was still there. It just had been deliberately covered over and hidden. "So do you want to hypnotize me? You're sure you know how?" "I'm not boasting, but I could make Methuselah remember the day he first got out of diapers." She stared at him. "My God, I think that's it. Methuselah. I think that's the word I couldn't remember." She kissed him on the mouth enthusiastically. "I've got to check something." She popped the cork and poured herself a glass. "Want some?" "I'm not sure what goes with eggs at this time of night. Probably tequila." "Good luck. You know where to find it. There are some limes in the fridge. Right now I'm going to fire up the Dell and do a little search." Now. His face dropped. "How about a little romantic?" "Whatever. Come and join me. Bring your plate. We'll go exploring in cyberspace. It'll be a romantic voyage. I've got a hunch about something." She walked back into the bedroom and licked on the computer. She sipped at her wine, deep but still fruity and delicious as it booted up. "What's going on?" he asked as he wandered in. He was carrying a shot glass of tequila and a white plate with the cheese omelet. The aroma was seductive. "I want to check out something. I have to be honest and confess I've been holding out on you a little. When I saw Winston Bartlett that night on the pier, something he said, ally, I need to do some confessing too. The time never seemed quite right. I need to tell you something about him." "Well, don't tell me now. I don't think I can handle anything else to worry about tonight. Please save it." She was logging on to AOL. Then she went to the search engine Google, which she had found to be the best. "I want to check out that name you came up with." It rang a bell. She typed in Methuselah, supposedly the guy who lived for nearly 1,000 years. There were pages and pages of references relating to that word. It started with a 5,000-year-old pine tree, then an article from Modern Maturity on how to extend life, then Caltech research on a longevity gene, then a rock band in Texas, undoubtedly very retro. Short story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, and so it went. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked, holding out a fork. Here, want a bite? She reached and tore off a fluffy corner. He did eggs perfectly. Thanks, she said, chew. Now she was moving to the third page. I think I'm looking for an organization, and Methuselah was in the name, at least. That's what I seem to remember. I'm definitely repressing a lot. Well, what about that one? He asked, Pointy. The line read, the Methuselah Society. That's it, she declared. Now I remember, that's the name he used, I swear, so it's real, I'm not crazy. What are you talking about? It's him. That's what he said he was going to do, she clicked on the name. The web page came up, and it was strictly in black and white with small print. And there it was again, the Methuselah Society. There was no information beyond a request for a secure email address. Looks like they want to check you out, Stone said, to make sure you're not connected to politics or law enforcement. Then why not give it a shot, Stone said. You're on AOL, you'd have to be a civilian. She typed in her address and entered it. Immediately, a little yellow padlock appeared in the lower right-hand corner, indicating their communication was secure. Then a notice materialized, a small square flickering to life. It contained her phone number and then her name. Next, a complete financial record began to scroll down. It had been elicited from banks, mortgage companies, credit services. There was value of real estate owned, mortgages outstanding, bank accounts, outstanding obligations, estimated net worth. It had all appeared in a time span of seconds. Wow, Stone said. There are no secrets left from these guys, whoever they are. They are wired. Then a message appeared. The minimum net worth required to be a member is $500 million. A fee for membership is $100 million. A $10 million retainer is required while your application is being processed. Please be prepared to designate the ages you and your companion wish to remain. My God, she said. That's him, he's done it. Winston Bartlett is alive and well and selling immortality, real or not. Then another message came up. Welcome, Alexa. Please be advised you are already a member, but you have not yet selected a companion. Afterward, how much of the foregoing is true or even plausible? In late 2002, medical researchers in Dusseldorf announced they had successfully treated heart attack victims using stem cells, harvested from the patient's own bone marrow. The stem cells were delivered to damaged heart muscle via angioplasty catheters, a minimally invasive procedure. Subsequent monitoring indicated that the stem cells had reduced the damage to heart muscle tissue and had improved their heart function when compared to similar patients in a control group who had declined the procedure. It's already happening. The miraculous stem cell cures in this story are essentially an extrapolation of research well underway that has been the subject of magazine covers and is possibly the most promising and, yes, problematic field of medical research. The clocks at the Dorian Institute ran faster than ordinary timepieces, and research areas and cures that currently are only speculation were made real there. But that's why it's called fiction. As with the example cited above, many stem cell miracles conjured here may be just over the horizon. As for Kristen Ann, the Methuselah Society, they are a fictional embodiment of misgivings given voice by many, including no less an authority than Professor Leonard Hayflick, whose Hayflick limit, defining the process of how cells grow old, could be said to be the underpinning of modern stem cell research. He is now a leading bioethicist who is sufficiently convinced of our potential to use stem cells to arrest the actual aging process that he is worried about its ramifications in PRIN. He makes no claim that such a thing is imminent, but he doesn't dismiss its possibility either. He has far-reaching societal concerns about this, and he also raises biological issues such as if you've treated your brain. Ality, by using stem cells to grow new neural tissue, have you altered your mind? Are you still you? It's called regenerative medicine. Watch for it.